that the main character's life turned upside down. A banquet was held in the palace to celebrate the victory in the battle and to recognize the services of Duke Vanderlick, who played a key role. Present at the banquet was Lady Clarissa, a dark star in the sky of splendor. Her black, luxurious dress seemed to be woven from the night itself. Her eyes were especially striking dark blue, deep, like bottomless lakes, in which both light and shadow were reflected. The guests noticed the Duke's arrival. The conversations in the hall immediately died down, and the ladies' gazes turned in his direction. Duke Albert Vanderlick walked in with a confident gait, exuding authority, and his dark suit, impeccably tailored, emphasized his stately figure. The ladies were shy, trying not to attract his attention, but at the same time they hoped that he would honor them with his glance. A young gentleman entered with the young man, and all the ladies, as soon as they saw him, simply squealed with delight. This boy was Eric Vanderlick, a young lord who was making his first appearance at a social event. The ladies began to whisper, which meant that the rumors that the young gentleman would appear at the banquet were true. The Duke, as a wise ruler, understood this game and skillfully used it, creating an aura of strength and power around himself. The girls couldn't stop discussing the appearance of the venerable gentleman and the cute young lord. House Vanderlick served as the northern shield of the kingdom of Adoran, and they held off enemy invasions on more than one occasion. But the noble family has a sinister reputation, and their family members are said to be cold-blooded, ruthless people. They are a cruel race, willing to even use children as weapons to win, and there were rumors that their castle was full of evil spirits. And many knew that no one who crossed the threshold of his palace ever returned from there alive. A little boy unexpectedly appeared at the banquet in a silk suit with chubby cheeks. He caused everyone to smile with affection. Clarissa did not expect a small child to appear at the banquet, and she was so surprised that she even opened the roses. The little boy, caught up in the bright reflection of light in the crystal chandelier, suddenly stumbled, his tiny legs gave way, and he fell, unable to hold on. The baby began to cry loudly, and everyone understood that this was bad because if you anger the Duke, he will not spare even the child. There was silence, broken only by the quiet sob of a child. Everyone froze, waiting for the Duke's reaction. The guests were incredibly frightened. The ladies closed their eyes because the Duke was heading straight for the baby and no one could watch it. The gentleman had no intention of doing anything with his baby and only took out a bright, ringing rattle. The guests were perplexed. The Duke had a bad reputation and he spared absolutely no one. The boy stared at the colorful, ringing rattle with his mouth open, and at that moment he completely forgot that he had just fallen. Eric picked up the boy and asked why little Theo was here, because his brother knew very well that he wasn't allowed here. None of the guests understood what was going on, and little Theo calmed down instantly as soon as he was in his brother's arms. Everyone began to whisper, and it was not known that his lordship had another child. The most surprised of all was Clarissa, who immediately came out of the crowd wanting to help the baby. The little gentleman was Theodore Vanderlick, who, as soon as he saw the girl in the crowd, called her his mother. All the guests heard perfectly well that Theodore said the word mama, but the girl stood there in bewilderment. She said softly that she had told Lord Theo long ago, and she was not his mother at all. At that moment, the Duke just walked towards the girl, and deathly silence reigned in the hall. Albert stated that little Theo came here because he wanted to see Lady Clarissa, which is why he ran straight to her. The lady decided that perhaps it would be worthwhile to take the Lord to a separate room and wait there, so as not to embarrass the guests present. But Albert, taking the girl by the hand, declared that this would definitely not work, and that another method must be followed. Today at this banquet, he wanted to announce to everyone that Lady Clarissa would soon become his wife. The lady's reaction was unpredictable, and she screamed at the top of her voice what the Duke meant. Albert confessed that the girl had to take responsibility. She had stolen his heart and the hearts of his sons, so he couldn't just let her go. This girl knew all the secrets of the Vanderlick house, but she did not understand why the Duke made such a decision. And now all that was left was to guess what would happen to her in the future, where she would be surrounded by the Duke and his children. It all started on the day when the heroine did not even imagine that her fate could change so much. She lived with her children in a small village and did not think at all about what could happen. Clarissa carefully read the children a fairy tale about how the prince and princess lived happily ever after, trying to instill a sense of love in the children from an early age. As soon as the story ended, the kids asked to read the next book, and some of them would rather play hide-and-seek. The kids were always fighting because they each wanted to do their own thing, but the lady managed all the kids just fine. Suddenly the door opened, and this meant that the children's guardians had come for them and were ready to take them right away. Every time the guardians came, the kids were incredibly happy because each of them was a mommy or daddy. The guardians left their children for some time at this estate, where Lady Clarissa looked after them with care. Every time the guardians returned for their children, they were incredibly happy to see them. This kind place was founded by Clarissa's mother. She became a countess after her father's death and opened an orphanage. Children who had lost one or both parents came here, and the mother wanted fewer children to end up in orphanages or on the streets. That's how it all began, and the daughter considered it her duty to continue the work of her mother, who loved children incredibly. Everything was fine until one moment, and Clarissa was happy with her beloved mother. But one day her mother died, never having had time to realize her dream, and now the main character ran this orphanage. In fact, the shelter was very poor financially, but she didn't want to give up on her dream. And every day, being with her children, she understood that she was on the right path, following the call of her heart. She always returned with a feeling of emptiness, because no one was waiting for her at home anyway. But one ordinary day, her assistant reported urgent news Clarissa's relatives had arrived. The heroine never expected that one day she would be visited by some relatives about whom she knew absolutely nothing. One day, without warning, they suddenly burst into her everyday life, and it was the family of Count Nocturnal. Having met the guests at the huge dining table, the lady looked warily at the gentleman who had suddenly appeared. Clarissa's uncle, the great Count Nocturnal, said they had come to celebrate her birthday. His cousin, Annetta, came with him and said in a joyful voice that she had been waiting so long to meet her little sister. Countess Nocturnal, Clarissa's aunt, wondered if the lady had been to that shelter again. But when the conversation turned to her birthday, the girl was very surprised because she had never celebrated her holiday. Awkwardly looking at her reflection in the bowl of soup, she realized why her relatives had gathered, because today really was her birthday. Previously, the Count's family had never shown the slightest interest in their relative, and after the death of her mother, her uncle's family moved to the estate under the pretext of guardianship. But they very quickly took over the estate and stripped Clarissa of everything, and from then on they acted as if she didn't exist at all. Today, for some reason, they decided to show up, and the heroine undoubtedly expected a trick from them. The Count stated that today they had invited a special guest, who was the royal envoy. He asked the young man to come in, and the venerable gentleman politely asked for forgiveness for his reflection in the dinner ceremony. The heroine was surprised to see the royal messenger, and he certainly looked like the representative of the king himself. The young man arrived to read the will of the late Countess, Mother Clarissa Nocturnal. The royal envoy reported that all the property of the house should be inherited by the rightful heir, Clarissa Nocturnal, including the city of Letitia and the adjacent mines, and only now did the lady begin to understand that we were talking about her mother's inheritance. It all happened today because on the day of her birth, the lady officially came of age and now has the full right to inherit property. The young man handed the girl an official document which described the property that belonged to her as a true noblewoman. The heroine realized that with this inheritance, she could save the orphanage and return it to a happy life. Clarissa could have kept her mother's dream alive and protected all the children who were in the orphanage. But just as she was about to take the official documents into her hands, the Count snatched the scroll right in front of her face. He was going to do it himself, as he had always been in charge of things, and he offered to draw up the paperwork so that he could manage the funds properly. Clarissa realized that they wanted to brazenly deceive her and get her mother's inheritance because that was all the Count was expecting. The messenger warned that the lady must first officially accept the inheritance, and for this he needed one piece of evidence. When submitting a will to the palace, a magic stone is usually used as a sign of acceptance, and the young man said that she most likely used the family stone as evidence, which should probably be with her daughter. The Count knew nothing about the family stone and was outraged, but the lady said that the stone was in her possession and that his mother had entrusted him with the jewel until her death. All this time she had kept the family stone in a place that no one would ever guess, so she walked over to her bed. There was supposed to be a stone in the safe under lock and key. The heroine took out the key to show the royal envoy the proof. She was absolutely sure that the stone was in the safe and no one knew about its existence. But as soon as she opened the box, she was beside herself with shock because the family jewel had suddenly disappeared. The Count was indignant. Could the girl have lost it? Because this thing must be very valuable. Now he was incredibly angry because he understood the consequences perfectly well, and asked if she couldn't keep track of just one thing. The Count had always been impudent and rude, and even a stranger did not stop him from calling Clarissa useless and helpless. He threatened the girl to find this stone immediately, because if she did not find it, she knew very well what would happen to her shelter. He angrily declared that the girl was obliged to sign the document, and swore that only in this case there would be no orphanage children. In his opinion, the orphanage was dirty and useless, and the children who lived there were not worth even a few coins. Clarissa had always known what kind of greedy and evil people these were who were just waiting for her to come of age. For just one moment, because of her kind and noble soul, the heroine allowed herself to hope for the best. She felt that the loss of the family stone was her mistake, and she promised the Count to take responsibility and be sure to find it. The lady warned that if something happened to the children during this time, she would never return to the Count's house, and moreover, the Count would not see the signed document. The Count was beside himself with rage, and the girl declared that he would finally be able to pay off that brothel, and his aunt would pay the crazy bills for her useless jewelry. She knew perfectly well where all the money went, on entertainment and useless trinkets, but the royal envoy did not want to hear it at all. The Countess and Countess continued to quarrel while their daughter tried to contain her angry emotions. She asked her parents to shut their mouths immediately, but no one was going to listen to the young lady. And while they continued to argue, Clarissa realized that she needed to leave this hellish place as soon as possible. That same evening, she packed her things and fled from the Count's estate, which was her mother's home. Before this incident, Annette had been acting rather strangely and was already preparing for Clarissa's coming of age, having learned that the magic stone could not be returned. She found out the information that the magic stone was bought by Duke Vanderlick himself, and it could not be bought back under any circumstances. Clarissa had been keeping an eye on Annette for a long time, who was acting suspiciously, and the heroine was right, because the young lady sold the stone to the merchant for pocket money. At that moment, she simply stole the stone from the lady's box and had no idea how valuable this thing would turn out to be. Therefore, the heroine had no choice but to try to get something back from this ruthless duke, which seemed almost impossible. But for the sake of the little children who lived in the orphanage, she was ready to go even to the most terrible person in the world, Duke Vanderlick. Once at the estate, she asked the assistant, but as expected, the Duke refused to return the magic stone. Clarissa insisted that she be given the opportunity to discuss this with the Duke himself, but the young man recommended that she leave the room. In fact, the heroine knew that it would not be easy to return the magic stone, and decided that she would have to look for another way. But she noticed a strange thing. The estate was too quiet, and she did not meet a single servant. Suddenly, while in the corridor, she heard a loud sound and immediately realized what it was. It was definitely a baby crying, but she also felt the cursed magical energy, and something was clearly happening here. There were many terrible rumors about the Wunderlich family, and one of them was that they used children to win. Therefore, the heroine, not listening to the assistant, became afraid that the child might be in danger and ran up the stairs. She ran towards the baby's cry and found herself in one of the strange rooms that looked like a nursery. In the middle of the room stood a cradle in which a small baby lay alone, crying loudly throughout the palace. With trembling hands, the lady wanted to rock the cradle, but she was afraid of the Duke's anger, because here she was, a complete nobody. Surprisingly, she saw the family magic stone nearby and finally understood where it was. The voice that came from behind her was quiet and cool, and he wanted to know what kind of lady had entered the room. Clarissa felt goosebumps run down her spine from that dark voice, and she heard the clear ringing of a sword. Perhaps she would meet her end right now for breaking into the Duke's palace, so the heroine closed her eyes and waited for what would happen next. It was the owner of this estate, the same infamous Duke who was right now standing behind the girl. She understood that he was holding his sword in his hands and could cut off her head at any second, so she decided to turn around. As soon as she turned around, all her fears disappeared, because instead of a bloody sword, she saw a bright, colorful rattle. The Duke was holding it in his hands, and he looked incredibly funny with this cute little thing. Holding a child's toy in his hands, the Duke continued to silently look at the stranger who had appeared in the room. At the very beginning, Clarissa hurried to take the little baby by the hand so that he would finally calm down and stop crying. The Duke could not believe his eyes, and the baby really did not make a sound anymore, holding the woman's hand with his tiny fingers. Now, he wanted to know who was standing in front of him. The stranger had suddenly appeared in the children's room and was not supposed to be there. The lady politely stated her name and said that she had come to speak with the Duke on a very important matter. But suddenly she felt a powerful burst of magic and also heard a loud child's cry. Albert asked how the girl managed to make the baby stop crying because every day he tries to overcome his loud cries. The lady herself did not even understand when the baby stopped screaming. Only now did she notice that he grabbed her hand and held it tightly with his little fingers. The heroine suggested that perhaps the child had rocked himself to sleep, but the Duke understood that he now needed to talk to the stranger in person. Albert told her to follow him, and Clarissa obediently followed the cool youth. Well, she remained alive, and the Duke did not cut off her head, and now she was ready to discuss anything with him. But for a moment the lady stopped, and if you think about it, that damn magical energy she felt earlier suddenly disappeared. The lady went into the drawing room, and the Duke sat down opposite her, wanting to ask the girl many questions. The first thing she asked was what kind of child was lying in the cradle, and Albert immediately admitted that the baby was his son. Having found out all the information before the visit, the heroine was sure that the Duke must definitely be alone. She never believed all these terrible rumors about the gentleman, and assumed that he must turn out to be a fair man. But she was afraid that if he really was going to use the child, she would have to intervene in this terrible story. At that moment, the baby, who was lying nearby in the stroller, began to cry loudly and shrilly throughout the entire estate. The sound of the baby's crying deafened Clarissa and Albert, because until that time the child had been sleeping peacefully. The assistant rushed to the carriage, not understanding what to do, and the Duke stood nearby, still holding the rattle in his hands. Each time he tried to calm the child with a toy, and this method usually worked. So Albert started shaking the rattle in front of the baby, and the sound fortunately began to calm him down a little. But this lasted only a few seconds, and the next moment, the rattle flew straight into the venerable gentleman's face. Clarissa saw that the relationship between father and son was completely cold, and the baby did not trust him. So she suggested that the Duke take the baby in his arms so that he could feel the warmth of his parents. Albert clumsily took the child in his arms. It was obvious that he was doing this for the first time. The lady told her how to hold the baby correctly, without grabbing him abruptly, and at that moment the baby sweetly took her finger. Clarissa, she said, she runs an orphanage, so she knows exactly how to handle children. She began to carefully stroke the baby's hand and was sure that he would soon calm down. When the child finally felt the warmth of a woman's hand, his eyes seemed to double in size with admiration. The Duke still held the baby in his arms, but he had no idea how to give him parental love. The next second, when it seemed as if the baby had calmed down, he again began to cry and scream loudly. Clarisse felt something strange, and it was definitely the same dark energy she had felt before. Looking around, she tried to understand where the dark energy was coming from, and probably for this reason the baby was constantly crying. She knew absolutely nothing about the Duke's life, but she felt that something strange was happening here. And as soon as the baby began to cry, she clearly felt that the source of all this strong magic was coming from the child. Magic is a power that a person is born with, and when its reserves are depleted, the body becomes lifeless and simply dies. The heroine screamed at the Duke that if things continued like this, the most terrible tragedy could happen to the child. Albert asked the girl to try to calm the baby again because she had done it so well last time. The baby released magic when he cried, and the heroine agreed to take the child in her arms, but told her how to hand him over correctly. She was very good with children, and as soon as the baby was in her arms, he immediately began to calm down. With sadness in her eyes, the heroine understood that such a powerful release of magic was dangerous, and if it was released constantly, everything could end badly. But she had never calmed such small children before, but the baby would feel her kind heart. The lady had no special abilities, but she wanted with all her might for the baby to stop crying. It was as if a bright magical aura appeared around them, and the lady said in a gentle voice that everything would be fine, and the baby just needed to calm down. Not even a couple of seconds had passed before the baby looked at the lady with joyful eyes and began to mumble something. And as soon as she tried to calm him down, the Duke couldn't believe his eyes, because it really worked. Clarissa felt a strange warmth inside, as if her heart had suddenly started beating faster, and she even shuddered from the unusual sensations. The Duke understood that if the baby continued to cry like this, he would have no more than 3 months to live. At first, he couldn't believe it himself, but it seemed the girl really did have a gift for calming little children. Albert understood that there was too little time left, and he had been trying to do something for a long time, but unfortunately nothing worked. So he looked at the lady and asked her to take care of the baby for 3 months, and he himself was going to find a way during this time to save his son. The Duke realized that Clarissa had come here to return the magic stone that he had once managed to buy. Albert offered to give the girl the magic stone as payment if she stayed with the child all this time. This stone was originally purchased to help Theo, but the Duke's plans soon changed. Albert ordered the contract to be prepared and suggested that the lady discuss the details a little later while she held the baby in her arms. In addition to the magic stone, he was going to provide her with a salary, and if the girl had any other conditions, he was ready to fulfill them. Clarissa knew that if she could calm the baby, the child would have a chance to survive, and that was a big responsibility. But she couldn't just leave and let the baby die just because he cried all the time and no one could calm him down. Therefore, the heroine had no choice but to agree to the Duke's condition, and her kind heart could not leave the child in trouble. She happily admitted that she was ready to accept the Duke's contract, and all the time while she held the baby in her arms, he laughed and had fun. Clarissa had one more small condition, and she asked the Duke to help her mother's shelter, and to the children who live there, because the Duke could protect them using his high title and enormous power. This chance was the only one to save the shelter, and the heroine generously asked Albert for help. Albert didn't even hesitate and immediately agreed, because his son's life was at stake. Clarissa was incredibly happy because this was a great chance for the shelter to grow and prosper. At this point, the assistant decided to intervene in their conversation because he had a brilliant idea. He told the Duke that this was the perfect chance to marry this girl and make her a duchess. As soon as Albert heard about this, he immediately asked his assistant to stop talking nonsense, and the heroine understood that this was out of the question. But before the Duke could even say these words, the assistant realized that this girl had refused him without hesitation. Clarissa admitted that she simply wasn't thinking about marriage at all right now and had no intention of building a family life. At the most opportune moment, the baby grabbed her by the dress and unexpectedly called the stranger his mother. The surprise of everyone present knew no bounds, and Clarissa was the most shocked of all, because the Duke's son had just said his first word, calling the stranger his mother. Albert had never seen the baby so talkative, and it was the first time she had heard him speak. It probably didn't mean anything, but babies can often make strange sounds and babble all sorts of things. The Duke was indignant and thought that the lady wanted to say that his son was simply stupid, but she did not mean that at all. The assistant apologized for interrupting the conversation and asked Clarissa if she had used healing magic on Lord Theodore before. Everyone knew that Lord Theodore's mother was skilled in using healing magic, but the lady knew absolutely nothing about it. And the assistant thought that perhaps this was the reason for the confusion, and that the girl was probably connected with magic. But Clarissa admitted that she had never been able to use magic and had no idea what it was. Healing magic is considered to be particularly difficult, and only a few people in the entire kingdom are able to use it. The lady was sure that there was not the slightest chance that someone like her would be able to master such complex spells. The assistant reported that the baby's nanny had fallen ill due to the effects of his magic, and it looked like it would take a long time to recover. Before this, the Duke himself looked after the child, since his body has resistance to magical emissions. The assistant noticed that it seemed that the girl was also not affected by Lord Theodore's magic, and this was definitely worth investigating. They say that the castle has few staff precisely because of the influence of the baby's strong magic, which affects the body. But as far as Clarissa could hear, people were starting to come back little by little, and she was going to take good care of little Theo. The first thing she decided to do was write a letter to the children at the orphanage to tell them how sorry she was that she had to leave suddenly. She wrote that the children should not worry about the orphanage because the Duke promised that he would protect them until her return. When Clarissa finished writing the letter, she felt that she had done a very important thing and informed the children of the orphanage about her absence. She even imagined how the kids reacted to the appearance of the Duke's knights, and everyone was probably just in shock. At that moment, strange sounds came from the baby's crib, and probably little Theo finally woke up. He opened his little eyes and tried to grab something in the air with his chubby little hands. The lady realized that she needed to get some clean clothes and change the baby before he fell asleep again. In the chest of drawers next to the crib, the heroine found a cute shirt that she was going to put on Mr. Theo. Today the baby didn't cry at all, and only made strange sounds that babies usually mumble. Looking with joy at the awakened Theo, the lady asked for forgiveness in a calm voice for keeping him waiting. But suddenly the heroine heard that there was definitely someone in the room besides her, and this was definitely not the Duke. Suddenly she saw young Master Eric, who quickly took the baby from the crib into his arms and looked menacingly at the girl. The boy's gaze was incredibly angry, as if he was afraid that the heroine would harm his brother. He ran as fast as he could towards the balcony, holding the baby in his arms, while Clarissa screamed and tried to stop him. The lady was incredibly excited and ran to the balcony, managing to see how the young gentleman used magic and deftly jumped straight down. Little Theo cried in his arms, and the young master suddenly noticed how the magic had unexpectedly dissipated. If he had used it, he would have landed without any problems, but now the boy was flying down with a baby in his arms. Clarissa tried to stop him, but the young gentleman was so agile that she only managed to see him jump down from the balcony. But the lady was also incredibly smart and managed to grab the boy right by the arm so that he wouldn't fall. Since the young master's magic had disappeared without a trace, if these hadn't grabbed him, he would have simply fallen with the child in his arms. Eric was also scared because he was sure that his magic had simply disappeared somewhere, although this had never happened before. Clarissa tried with all her might to hold the boy with one hand and tried to stay on her feet so as not to fall down with him. As soon as she took his hand, for some reason, a magical whirlwind swirled the heroes, and they landed smoothly on the ground. It was simply incredible and quite strange, but for some reason the magic appeared again when the girl took the young master's hand. Now the three of them were sitting on the grass, having avoided the terrible fall, and the young gentleman understood what danger he had just exposed his brother to. He didn't understand what was happening, but he realized that the magic had definitely dissipated for just a second. But then she appeared again, and that is why the heroes did not fall from the high balcony. The boy was shaking, holding his brother in his arms, while the heroine tried to find out if he was hurt anywhere. Clarissa was extremely glad that the situation had turned out this way, but she was still dissatisfied with the young master's behavior. She looked at him menacingly and warned him that he should never climb or jump from the second floor again, because it was too dangerous. In Eric's arms, who began to cry very loudly, and even the young master was frightened by how deafening the sound was, Clarissa asked to give the child to her in order to calm the nervous baby. She extended her hands caringly for the young gentleman to give him the child, and told him that she had recently become his nanny. Eric continued to look angrily at the girl, although he understood perfectly well that he would not be able to calm his little brother down. He said they had a lot of nannies, and every time they showed up, Theo only got worse. And at that moment, Clarissa realized that the boy had been trying to protect Lord Theo all this time, and his rage was precisely for that reason. The Duke's assistant ran up to them, probably having heard in the estate that something was happening in the courtyard. He heard a loud noise and immediately hurried to the yard. The young man was so scared that he thought his heart would stop, but fortunately, everything was fine. Clarissa apologized for the noise and admitted that none of them were hurt, but she didn't even notice that blood was pouring from her hand. The lady asked no one to worry under any circumstances, stating that it was a small scratch and it would heal on its own. After living with children from an orphanage, where the lady constantly received some kind of bruises or abrasions, she was accustomed to minor injuries. But the young master cried out, "Even small wounds can become inflamed and lead to death," and he read about this in a book. Eric quickly handed the baby over to the assistant, but he himself was incredibly worried about what had happened. There really was a huge scratch on the girl's hand, from which blood was spurting. Eric hurried to help the girl. He knew about proper first aid, when the wound must be washed with clean water and then stop the bleeding. The next second, the scratch on the heroine's hand began to instantly heal, and she realized that the boy was using healing magic. She remembered the assistant had said that Lord Theo's mother could use healing magic, and probably the Duke's son had the same ability. And at that moment, the young gentleman was incredibly sweet and caring, because he had just helped the girl heal her wound. Clarissa was delighted. The gentleman was still very young, but could already use such a complex healing spell. Eric couldn't stand the praise and, embarrassed, ran away as fast as he could. The assistant was surprised, because he had not seen Lord Eric express his strong emotions in such a way for a long time. The Duke was supposed to introduce the new nanny to Eric tomorrow, but it looks like he arrived earlier than expected and no one had time to explain anything. Taking the young lord in her arms, the girl realized how much her brother adored Theo and how worried they were about him. Lord Eric turned out to be a very loving man when it came to family, which is why he tried to protect his brother from the stranger. After the unexpected situation, the nanny returned to the child's room and held him in her arms the entire time. But young Master Eric kept a close eye on what was happening behind the half-open door because he expected a catch in everything. Clarissa wanted to be friends with Eric if she could, but right now the boy was just angry. That is why he kept his eyes on the new nanny all the time and watched as she changed and bathed the baby. The heroine understood that if she tried to talk to him, he would most likely run away, and now she decided to focus on her duties. So she carefully wanted to feed baby Theo some delicious carrot porridge while the young lord continued to watch her. As soon as she brought the spoon to the baby, at that moment Eric ran into the room and stuck the spoon in his mouth. Clarissa didn't expect such behavior from the young master at all, but he just wanted to taste the porridge. He said this not because he didn't trust the new nanny, but simply because he wanted to make sure the porridge was actually tasty. Clarissa was scared at first, but then she realized that the boy was just worried about his brother. And she wasn't even going to pay attention to his cries that she was extremely suspicious and was thinking of bribing him with food. At that moment, the young gentleman ran out of the room and told the nanny to simply wait where she was. But she continued to go about her duties and did not understand whether she really looked so suspicious. A few days later, the young gentleman behaved in exactly the same way, constantly hanging outside the door of the children's room and trying to understand what the new nanny was hiding. The young gentleman didn't trust anyone, and Clarissa seemed scary to him because all the previous nannies were bad. He was always standing behind the door, but this time something unexpected happened. The young gentleman simply burst into the children's room. Through the half-open door, he saw what looked like a girl trying to seduce Arnold by putting her hands on his face. The boy could not contain his rage and shouted for the nanny to get away from his lordship immediately. Clarissa never thought that the young master would burst into the room like that, and she actually stood next to the Duke. Eric seemed to be expecting just that, and declared that the new nanny had finally shown her true colors and was using Theo to win the Duke's favor. He was sure that the girl was trying to seduce him, so he burst into the room and declared that he would never give in to her deception. The Duke grabbed the boy by the hand, because the young gentleman was indeed behaving too insolently. He ordered him not to use magic so frivolously, and Eric could not disobey Arnold. One cold glance from the Duke made him feel uneasy, and the young gentleman immediately tried to calm down. The Duke held his hand tightly, and the boy, nervously, asked the gentleman for forgiveness. Clarissa assumed that there had probably been a misunderstanding, and the young gentleman had not burst into the children's room for no reason. Perhaps he simply came to see how his brother was feeling, who was now taking a bath, splashing and enjoying himself. The lady told Eric that the young gentleman was having fun while being bathed, but the Duke accidentally got some hot water on him. That was why Eric found the girl and the Duke standing opposite each other, because Clarissa was simply trying to wipe the hot water off his face. The Duke asked the young gentleman not to jump to conclusions about the new nanny they had, and he was sure that even if this woman really had such a plan, he still would not have given in. Arnold understood perfectly well that Clarissa had never even thought of taking advantage of his title and seducing him. The heroine had never really had such an intention, but after these words she felt as if she had been rejected. Arnold looked at Eric with a menacing gaze. The boy realized that this time he was completely wrong. The Duke himself had no intention of ever marrying, since he had clearly stated earlier that it was for this very reason that he had adopted the young gentleman. Eric realized he had done wrong when he burst into the room and started screaming. And only now did the heroine learn that the young gentleman turned out to be the Duke's adopted child, and not his relative at all. Arnold understood that Eric was trying to protect Theo, but he warned the boy not to worry about anything else. Eric was well aware of his guilt, and understood that he had done wrong, and the Duke's serious attitude was fully justified. The Duke's shirt was wet from bathing the baby, and he went to change, warning Clarissa that the rest of the duties were hers. This situation was incredibly awkward, and looking at the upset young master, the girl understood his feelings perfectly. Lord Eric apologized for his strange words, and also wanted to leave the children's room so as not to embarrass the new nanny. But she suggested that the young master stay with her, because the little lord was still in the bath, and it was supposedly difficult for her to cope with him alone. So the girl thoughtfully handed the boy a towel and asked if he wanted to help bathe his brother. At first the young gentleman felt awkward and looked at the nanny in surprise, but then he reached out with his small hand for the towel and agreed. Eric, with all his care and kindness, began to wipe the baby, and the nanny prompted him on how to properly handle the child. The young gentleman treated the baby like this for the first time, and was even surprised at how pleasantly he smelled after bathing. After a pleasant bath, Clarissa carefully changed little Lord Theo into clean, washed clothes. And after the bath procedures, the baby burst into laughter and was incredibly happy, which had never happened to him before. Clarissa replied, "The baby just beams when his little brother is looking after him, and Lord Theo must adore his big brother." When the Duke tried to bathe the baby, he cried loudly and splashed around in the hot water all the time. Now that Theo was in the arms of his beloved brother, he simply blossomed and smacked his pacifier contentedly. The young gentleman asked how Clarissa knew so much, and she said that she ran an orphanage where there were many children. She took care of children who had no parents or only one parent, and these kids needed care more than anyone else. The young master kissed his little brother on the forehead, and now he finally understood that the little lord was in caring hands. And after the lady's words, he wondered if he and Theo were really the same children who had the same parent. With sadness, the lady realized that this was completely true, and the boys really did not have a mother. And for her, caring for these children was almost no different from caring for children who were in an orphanage. But as soon as the lady said this, she immediately covered her mouth with her hand, as if she had said something bad. After all, Eric in her head was already starting to scream, "They are the Duke's children, and there is no need to compare them with commoners." But the young gentleman did not answer this, and the lady understood that Eric would not go into details and would not be offended. He only asked how far away the shelter run by the new nanny was from here. The shelter required a carriage ride and was located on land that belonged to the heroine's family. The young gentleman thought that if his lordship gave him permission, he would be happy to go there someday. Clarissa didn't even expect that Eric would want to visit an orphanage with small children without her request. And as soon as she heard this, she was incredibly happy and was ready to happily meet Eric on the threshold of the shelter. Clarissa was so happy now, just from these words, and her feelings could not be described in words. But the young gentleman was callous in expressing his emotions. He pulled his hand away, declaring that the lady should not think anything, and that supporting such places was simply the duty of a nobleman. The young gentleman again lost control of his emotions and ran out of the children's room while the lady looked after him sweetly. She had no idea what to expect from Eric, but now she was glad that she had finally gotten along with young Lord Eric, and she was sure that their relationship would be wonderful. Life at the estate went on as usual, and today Lord Theo was in a good mood and did not cry. So Clarissa felt like she would now be able to write an excellent report on the days she spent here. She walked along the huge corridor of the palace, and her attention was drawn to the screams coming from the courtyard of the estate. Looking out the window, the lady saw an enraged knight scolding the young gentleman and shouting that he was not listening to him at all. The knight was indignant that the little boy couldn't even hold a sword and was completely unfit to be the Duke's heir. Unfortunately, Clarissa found herself in a situation where the fencing instructor was scolding the young master. He was furious, as if the boy was afraid of the sword, and confidently shouted that he had no pride at all as a true heir. And the mentor allowed himself to say hurtful words if the boy continued in the same spirit. He would again lose people close to him. The young master could not stand the furious aggression of his mentor, and throwing away his sword, he ran away straight from the lesson. Clarissa witnessed this and saw the young gentleman running desperately with tears in his eyes. She was not going to leave this situation unattended, and loudly stamping her heels, she immediately headed towards the Duke, wanting to tell him in great detail about what was happening in class with a rude teacher. She just happened to catch Arnold in the corridor and began to say something excitedly, while the Duke did not understand a word. Clarissa immediately told about what she saw, how Lord Eric was engaged in fencing, but his instructor acted too meanly. As soon as she began to speak about the young master, the Duke's scarlet eyes flashed angrily, declaring that the girl should only be responsible for Theodore. And he asked her not to interfere in matters that concerned young Master Eric anymore, because it was none of her business. The heroine felt very awkward because she just wanted to help Eric because she saw an inappropriate situation. Looking at his watch, the Duke coldly stated that it was time for her to report on her duties and not poke her nose into other people's business. He asked to follow him and wanted to hear her out right now in his office about how things were with Theo. The girl was incredibly worried. Right now, Lord Eric was probably crying in his room, and would he be okay? That same day, the Duke's assistant was indignant that he himself heard it from Lady Clarissa, and perhaps the Duke should work on the way he expresses his thoughts. The Duke asked not to interfere in matters concerning Eric, but the assistant could have rephrased his words, and they would have sounded less rude. He understood that the nanny did not like it, but he did not see how the instructor behaved during the lesson. In fact, Arnold is still not used to life outside the battlefield, especially in dealing with women. The assistant understood his feelings, but this was no reason to turn a blind eye to what was happening, because the mentor was really wrong. During dinner, the Duke carefully studied the documents containing Clarissa's report on the performance of her duties. This was data on the Lord's magical activity, and the number of emissions, the date, and even the change in physical condition. Everything was recorded with incredible accuracy. The assistant looked closely at the documents, and it was truly astonishing, because he clearly saw a noticeable decrease in magical emissions. In a private conversation with the Duke, he suggested that it seemed that this woman could really break the curse of the Duke's family. Arnold wasn't going to rush to conclusions, and for now, this was just a great opportunity to save his son. All this time, Clarissa was restless and wondering if everything was okay with Lord Eric after the terrible lesson. She was incredibly worried about the boy, even though she was just a nanny for baby Theo. But she couldn't do anything and was worried about the young master, but now she needed to focus on studying magic. Since baby Theo had fallen asleep, she left him with a temporary nanny who was the Duke's assistant. Entering the library, she did not notice that Lord Eric was sitting at the table, reading healing magic and medical books. There was a pile of various books lying on the table next to the boy, and Clarissa wondered if the young gentleman was really studying all of this himself. She couldn't even imagine that at such a young age, Eric had already read so many books. But the boy looked at the nanny with bewilderment. The lady said that she herself secretly tried to study on her own, but she was never able to become as smart as Eric. The cousin took everything from the heroine and said that it was pointless to spend money on her education. And it turns out that the young gentleman was incredibly similar to Clarissa because he also sought to gain knowledge and read many books. The heroine was happy because she had just made sure that the boy was okay and was very afraid that he would be depressed and in a bad mood. She politely asked to sit down next to the young gentleman, admitting that she would like to talk to him. But Eric still couldn't get over his embarrassment, and he ran away again screaming, "Who would want to study with someone like Clarissa?" After visiting the library, the heroine asked the assistant why Lord Eric was studying on his own and whether he really didn't have a teacher. Healing magic and medicine were not considered mandatory subjects for a future duke, and the Duke's assistant told him about this. Instead of lessons, they decided that now the young master should focus on fencing and not be distracted by other training. Ever since his parents died, Eric had come to hate swords, and the Duke was also worried about it, but the lady was sure that such an approach could do harm. But she had no idea that the boy's parents had died tragically, and only found out about it now. Young Master Eric and his brother were orphans, children of the current Duke's elder brother, and after his death, the Duke inherited the title and took custody of his two sons. And finally, the whole truth was revealed to Clarissa that these children were indeed adopted. Every time Eric held a sword in his hands during training, his hands shook violently and his body did not obey at all. For him, the sword did not even look like the most terrible weapon, but something unimaginable that instilled wild horror in his childish soul. Therefore, the boy could not even hold it in his hands, and as soon as he tried to take it, the sword fell to the floor with a crash. During the lesson, the mentor again shouted at the young gentleman to pull himself together and accidentally found the notebook that he had taken with him to training. The boy shouted for the teacher to immediately give him his notebook back, and he had no right to take it away. But the man continued to shout and call him names, calling him weak and unworthy of the title of Duke. He grabbed a sword and cut Eric's notebook in half, declaring that it was best to get rid of it right now. The young master looked at what his teacher was doing and did not understand why he was treating him so cruelly. Clarissa couldn't stand it any longer and burst into class, blocking the boy with her body, standing in front of the teacher. The man was outraged that some stranger dared to come to class with the young master. Now the heroine was going to achieve justice and declared that the mentor would soon be deprived of the right to teach for rude behavior towards the student. The man was indignant at the lady who appeared in front of him and asked with rage in his eyes who she even was. Clarissa called herself the Duke's servant, but her status was of no importance to her now. The man screamed, "The lady does not understand who is standing in front of him because he is Lord Eric's instructor and he is not interested in the opinion of some servant." Clarissa continued to glare at the man, and she looked so viciously that even he felt uneasy. The lady picked up the notebook that the man had just cut with the blade of his sword and asked if he understood what was written there. She stated that Lord Eric was a genius child. He possessed healing magic, which was the most difficult in the world of magic. And if there are any difficulties, it is only because the young master is still too young, and there is absolutely no need to shout at him. Taking up a notebook, she stated that it is the responsibility of adults to help children with learning and growing up. The mentor kept pointing his finger at her, the rude guy kept shouting insolently, and the lady hinted that something was wrong with his mentoring. Clarissa was incredibly polite, but the man raised his voice, didn't even try to understand the situation, and it was absolutely incompetent. No matter how politely the nanny spoke to him, the man could not contain his rage and swung at the girl. Clutching Eric's notebook tightly to her chest, Clarissa saw his hand in the air and closed her eyes in fear. She didn't feel any pain at all, and she realized that the man didn't even hit her, although he clearly intended to. He never did what he had planned, because a strong male hand grabbed his hand. The Duke himself appeared out of nowhere, suddenly appearing here for some reason, and it was he who did not allow the mentor to hit the girl. The Duke's rage knew no bounds. He declared that he had personally hired this woman to look after Theodore and what exactly he was going to do with her. For some reason, Albert just now called Clarissa his woman, and he probably just didn't formulate his question correctly. As soon as the man learned that the girl was the Duke's woman, he bowed his head low and asked to accept his deepest apologies. He tried to justify himself somehow and asked if, since she was Theodore's nanny, this didn't make her behavior even more unacceptable. Clarissa knew she shouldn't interfere with other lessons, but she couldn't do otherwise now. The young gentleman tried to defend the nanny, saying that she was only trying to help him. The Duke was sure that this did not give the mentor the right to raise his hand against the girl, and declared that today he resigned from his position as a fencing instructor. Albert took out his sword and put it right to the throat of the man, who still tried to insist on his acquittal. But unfortunately, the man committed two unacceptable offenses, and firstly, he tried to attack an unarmed woman. And Albert also stated that the mentor was suspected of insulting the ducal house, and this is the second important point. As it turned out, he was spreading false rumors about his brother and embezzling funds allocated for Eric's education. The Duke knew everything perfectly well, but he was waiting for the moment to catch him by surprise. Until now, he had managed to deceive his good-natured brother and hold on to his position as instructor, but such tricks were impossible to pull off with Albert. So, as Lady Clarissa said, this man is not fit to be a teacher, and in other words, as of today, he is simply fired. The Duke offered to personally take charge of the young gentleman's education from that moment on and asked if he would mind. Eric stood there completely stunned, but as soon as he heard about it, he immediately rejoiced somewhere deep inside. All this time, Alberta was focused on Theo and completely forgot about the district gentleman, admitting that this would not happen again. The Duke was well aware of her mistake, and now decided to put everything in its place and remove unnecessary people from her life. But he only realized this thanks to a young girl who had recently appeared in his duchy. Clarissa now realized that when she spoke about the instructor's inappropriate behavior, she had influenced Albert's opinion. And at that very moment when he was resisting, he still listened to the opinion of the girl, who certainly did not wish harm to the young master. Albert fired his fencing instructor and decided to take up teaching children who desperately needed him. A few days later, as the Duke had reported, he really did begin to teach Lord Eric on his own. The fencing instructor soon left the mansion, angry and offended by his rude behavior. Clarissa shared with her assistant, because then she was really surprised and did not expect that the Duke would actually apologize. Much had changed since the death of the previous Duke, his brother, and from that moment on, Albert's life became completely different. He found himself literally overwhelmed with the responsibilities of his new position, and before that he had spent his entire life on the battlefield, fighting and defending the empire. And the young man was sure that Albert truly appreciated everything that the girl had done for the Lord, and he was also incredibly grateful to her. Until this moment, the heroine never thought that simply being needed by someone could bring her such a feeling of happiness. It had been many years since she had felt something like this, but now that she was in the Duke's house, it was as if everything had changed dramatically. Little Theodore never cried again, and everyone knew perfectly well who deserved the credit. Clarissa seemed to breathe life into this dark and gloomy place, and every one of its inhabitants was simply grateful to her. But most of all, she was happy when baby Theodore laughed, and his childish eyes admired her every second. She had a very warm relationship with this baby, and she felt how much he needed her at that moment. It was only after her appearance that Theodore stopped crying and felt what parental love and care were. He seemed to blossom like a dried rose flower and slowly began to turn into a blooming angel. Early in the morning, she was walking in the garden because the weather was fine, but suddenly she noticed something. Something was clearly happening in the garden, and standing next to the stroller, the heroine noticed the blooming roses. The heroine also asked her assistant to call Albert so that he could report an urgent matter. Clarissa was playing with the baby carefree, but she noticed something strange and decided to tell him what was going on. She was sure that the Duke must know about this, and it certainly required his attention. The agitated lady tried to explain to the Duke that this concerned Lord Theo and was a very serious matter. So far, neither the assistant nor the Duke understood what was going on here, and the nanny was going to tell everything. Sighing and closing his eyes, the Duke asked to tell everything in the smallest details in any case. In a garden where there had never been flowers, fragrant roses suddenly appeared, and the nanny was sure that the baby's energy was involved. Usually, small children could not use magic, and it was almost impossible, but the flowers suddenly blossomed, and the magic was related to life energy. The heroine wasn't sure if the young lord could do it again, but just recently the flowers were wilted and almost dying. It seemed like the magic worked when the baby smiled, and Clarissa was sure that if she could make him smile again, the magic would come back. These words sounded incredible, and the Duke could not even imagine that the baby possessed such power. The nanny carefully held the baby in her arms, but as soon as the Duke approached him, the baby immediately stopped smiling. For some reason, in his eyes, the Duke looked like an evil demon with red eyes, which he was afraid of. Lord Theo was still afraid of the master's face. He began to cry loudly again as soon as Albert approached him. Clarissa was sure that it was all in the gentleman's facial expressions, and she asked him to at least try to smile. Albert didn't understand why he had to do this, why the baby cried when he saw him. The Duke was the young lord's adoptive father, and Clarissa was sure it would be much more effective, so the Duke listened to her and tried to smile. As soon as he smiled, the baby cried even harder, and the nanny did not understand why the gentleman had such a fierce look. The assistant covered his face with his hand to suppress the hysterical laughter that the master's so-called smile caused him to experience. He laughed, and even tears flowed from his eyes, because his lordship was truly serious and he had never seen him smile. With this smile, the gentleman looked more like a wily villain than a sweet young man trying to smile at a child. Having placed the baby in the stroller, the lady realized that she had to help the gentleman learn to simply smile. She walked up to him and offered his fingers to his mouth, showing him how to do it correctly so as not to terrify those around him. His cold expression was frightening, and the heroine tried to relax his eyes so that the gentleman's expression would look a little softer. The young man smiled, and Clarissa finally managed to turn the Duke's frightening face into something sweet and pleasant. Suddenly, he took her hand, and for the first time someone came so close to him, and at that moment he realized something. This girl is not afraid of him at all, not afraid of his bright red, frightening eyes and fierce gaze. Clarissa didn't even realize that she had approached the Duke and touched his face with her gentle hands, and now the young man was very close. At that moment, a loud laugh came from the carriage, and the heroes turned towards Theo to understand what was happening. The baby really did laugh out loud, and the flowers around him continued to bloom and became even brighter. Now the Duke saw with his own eyes how the little lord, expressing joyful emotions, displayed magical abilities. Finally, when the gentleman smiled, little Theo was delighted, and the lady carefully took him in her arms, hugging him tenderly with all her heart. When the girl hugged the baby, it was as if a bright magical energy was hovering around them, and the Duke immediately noticed it. The garden was filled with bright pink roses, which continued to bloom from the ringing laughter of the young lord. Eric learned about his brother's magical abilities and decided to ask his nanny if she had learned anything else about his magic. It seems Lord Theo has activated magic that releases mana when he cries and conversely absorbs mana when he smiles. As the flowers bloomed precisely because of this, the young master sadly realized that his brother was probably in danger. Clarissa was surprised by these words, and could it really be that the young gentleman understood this only from this explanation? Eric explained that mana is a vital energy that is inherent in every person from birth. Therefore, the magic that consumes it can only be used by the few who have it in abundance. If you use this kind of magic too often, your mana will run out and you will simply die. But for the young lord, the magic worked when he cried or smiled unconsciously. Therefore, the young master was sure that for a baby with unstable mana, this was extremely dangerous, and Clarissa decided to support Eric. The boy turned out to be just an amazing genius who understood why strange things were happening to his brother. But as soon as the girl took her new master by the hand, he immediately pulled it away, because he still did not know what to do with the warmth of affection. He ran out of the library again and shouted at the nanny to stop pretending to know him well. Eric ran down the corridor of the palace, not understanding what was happening to him at that moment and why he was so angry. He grumbled that something was wrong with this woman and that she was acting too familiar, as if she were more than just a nanny. The boy was most indignant because all Clarissa talked about was Theo and the Duke, as if that was the happiest thing that had ever happened to her. As he walked down the corridor, he suddenly heard the gentleman's voice, and he was probably in the children's room. The boy opened the door slightly to take a look and make sure that he had not misheard. In the nursery, there was a nanny holding a baby in her arms and smiling happily at Duke Albert. The young master felt anger and rage when he saw these two being close and as if they were happy with each other. This time he didn't even go into the children's room, but ran as fast as he could, so as not to burst into tears of anger right in front of them. Today, he decided to feed his little brother himself because the nanny was busy with other things. Before his eyes still stood the picture where he saw Albert and Clarissa, who were chatting pleasantly and laughing. His thoughts were occupied only with this, and the boy could not understand why he was so angry about everything that was happening. He didn't even notice that the nanny called him by name, and only angrily shouted something in her direction. Instead of feeding the child, he accidentally spilled a spoonful of semolina porridge right onto the baby's clothes. Clarissa didn't see anything wrong with this, and offered to bring a change of clothes for the baby since this happens often. The young master stated that he needed to go to sword training, but as soon as he thought about it, his mood immediately became sad. The nanny warned the boy to be careful during training because the sword is a serious weapon. Without saying goodbye, he left the room, and the heroine immediately noticed that Eric had been looking very strange lately. He was too thoughtful, as if he was very worried or anxious about something. Clarissa noticed that when her master trained with the Duke, he always looked like he was in pain. And probably something strange has been happening to Eric lately, and maybe something happened at training. She decided not to contact the Duke and to find out everything herself, while little Theodore was finally fast asleep. The baby was fast asleep in his crib. The lady decided to take advantage of the moment and find out everything in detail. She sneaked into the training grounds where the Duke's training session was supposed to be taking place. The lady saw how the gentleman was looking closely at Eric, who was trying with all his might to hold the heavy sword in his hands. At that moment, the lady thought that it seemed like she had been thinking too many bad thoughts, and everything was fine during the training. Clarissa needed to get back before anyone saw her, but she wanted to observe the lesson. The Duke taught the young master how to use a real sword and told him that the blade had to be dulled. But the more Eric looked at the weapon and held it in his hands, the more real horror was visible in his eyes. All this reminded him of the death of his parents, and every training session was incredibly difficult for the boy. That's why this time the young gentleman even screamed because scary pictures came to his mind. The sword fell from his hands again. Every cell of Eric seemed to tremble with fear, and as soon as he saw the blade of the sword, old memories stirred his childish soul. Seeing that the boy was incredibly scared, the heroine could not help but intervene and ran out of her hiding place screaming. The Duke was surprised, because the nanny definitely shouldn't have been here, but she ran to Eric asking what had just happened. Despite the Duke's words not to interfere in Eric's affairs, Clarissa was still worried about his condition. It was part of her job description, and she came up with a great way to convince Arnold otherwise, by saying that Theo would start to worry if Eric looked tired. Arnold remembered very well that the previous instructor had scolded the boy for not being able to handle a real sword. So the Duke decided to use a different method and told the boy not to force himself to do something he didn't want to do. The young gentleman felt incredibly guilty and apologized to Arnold, although no one was scolding him now. And even the gentleman himself stated that Eric was not obliged to be the one holding the sword if he did not like it at all. But the boy remembered very well his past mistakes in class when his mentor constantly scolded him. He always shouted angrily. If the young man could not hold back even less, he was not fit to be the Duke's heir. This left an indelible pain in the boy's soul, and he, with tears in his eyes, asked Arnold to give him another chance. Each time he tried again and again to take the sword in his hands and cope with the terrible memories that overwhelmed him. This time, a nanny appeared at the lesson, and as soon as the boy tried to touch the sword again, she carefully took his hands. Eric felt the warmth and support that radiated from the nanny, who was kneeling in front of him. She asked Arnold if he was really going to give up Lord Eric, because that had to be absolutely untrue. Clarissa still knew the man very little, but the Duke had always tried to support Lord Theo, and such a man could not just abandon a child. Arnold was very surprised when he heard her words, because he had no intention of giving up the boy. The young gentleman became an adopted son, and he asked if he was needed only to help settle the chaos after his father's death, when power changed. Perhaps when Theodore grew up, he would be able to fulfill this role, and the boy did not understand when the Duke spoke about someone else taking it upon themselves. All this time, Eric thought that the Duke could not rely on him and tried his best. Eric had indeed grown into a smart boy, and he reminded the Duke incredibly of his older brother. But Arnold admitted that swordsmanship had never been a priority for him, and he hadn't expected Eric to be strong in fencing from the start. For the first time, Arnold spoke so frankly that even Clarissa did not expect the real truth that he voiced. The young man laughed. His brother couldn't even hold the ceremonial sword properly, and in this, he and Eric were incredibly similar. Arnold's brother was an excellent ruler, but like his son, he had absolutely no gift for fencing. That is why the Duke honed his skills on his own and fought on the battlefield in his place. Arnold confessed that if he could die serving his brother in the Duke's house, he would consider it a worthy end to his happy life. Clarissa, holding her breath, listened attentively to every word uttered by this sincere man. One day, Arnold could not even imagine that he would be left alone, and he was exactly like the lady who lost people close to him. Eric cried. He was sure it would be easier for the Duke to raise Theo and make him the heir instead of him, but Clarissa said that his lordship was not such a selfish man. And he is simply hopeless at raising children, because he even brought the baby Theodore to tears every time he simply met his gaze. So, holding the boy's hands tightly, the lady asked him not to worry under any circumstances, because there was no chance that the Duke was able to control the child. For the first time, Arnold and Eric had a frank conversation, and now they both understood a lot. The Duke felt that the boy was trying his best, but this was not his true path at all. So, looking into the eyes of the young master, he decided it was time to tell the whole truth. Eric had an incredible talent for magic, and Arnold asked the boy to concentrate on an activity that brought him pleasure. He also has a younger brother, and what one lacks, the other can always make up for. That's what brothers are for. Eric looked at Arnold and believed his words, because he understood perfectly well that the boy did not want to take up fencing. And in an instant, the boy's face lit up with an incredibly happy smile, because finally he could do what he loved. After this situation, the young master became much calmer, because the fencing training finally stopped, and he spent time with his younger brother. But Clarissa was the happiest of all, and the boy now looked much better and was happy. While the brothers were playing, the nanny was constantly nearby, and Eric decided to ask what she thought about Theodore's birthday. The young gentleman was worried and did not know what to give the baby, so he decided to ask the nanny. As soon as the lady heard about this, she became very excited, because she had no idea when Lord Theodore's birthday was. And she even dropped the box of toys from her hands when she found out that the baby's birthday was already next week. Little Theodore didn't yet know that a grand celebration might await him, where he would be surrounded by the love and care of his loved ones. The Duke would probably throw a party to celebrate little Theodore's birthday, but that was not yet known. Eric only knew that no one had spoken about it, and even the Duke himself had probably forgotten about the baby's birthday. For the nobles, a child's birthday was a special event, and as soon as the lady learned about it, she immediately hurried to the Duke to find out at least something. Before Eric could even say a word, Clarissa ran as fast as she could to Arnold's office. She soon returned incredibly sad and declared that there was no question of celebrating and that everything was in vain. Eric was not at all surprised, because he had already assumed that there would be no birthday. Arnold insisted that Theo's condition was too unstable to arrange a carefree celebration, and besides, they still knew nothing about Clarissa's magic. The Duke's statement was quite fair, and Eric was not even upset that there would be no celebration in honor of his brother. But the nanny was sure that in addition to Lord Theo's condition, there seemed to be another reason that the Duke simply wasn't talking about. He told me exactly what the matter was, but Clarissa felt very well that there was another very good reason. Eric was still a little upset when he found out about it, and the baby immediately sensed his mood. The little boy touched his brother's shirt, but for some reason tears were now welling up in his little eyes. Clarissa explained that the baby noticed that Eric looked sad and seemed to be worried about it himself. And every time Eric was excited about something, the baby felt his mood changes perfectly. To prevent this from happening again, the young master tried to laugh and hugged his beloved brother. From that day on, little Theodore seemed not to be amused by any games, and tears often appeared in his eyes. Each time the nanny tried to arrange some interesting game, but the baby still continued to frown frequently. Ever since the Duke said there would be no celebration, Lord Eric has been avoiding Lord Theo, probably so that he wouldn't sense his sadness. The baby stretched out his chubby little hands to his brother as soon as he saw him, and the nanny tried to calm the baby down, hoping that everything would be all right. She explained to the baby that his brother was very kind. He just didn't want Theo to see his sad mood. Even if it was a humble reception, Clarissa still wanted to do something for little Theodore. Because it's a wonderful holiday in honor of his birthday, and the heroine and Eric decided to discuss it personally with Arnold. The Duke never expected that this magnificent trinity would arrive to him so suddenly. His assistant was just about to leave because there was a small problem in the trading company and asked the lady to be brief. The lady held the baby in her arms and immediately began with a question about celebrating the baby's birthday. Eric stood by and watched silently as the heroine bravely asked Arnold to celebrate Theodore's birthday. Arnold had already expressed his opinion, but after that he thought for a moment and admitted to Clarissa that now was not the best time for a celebration. Clarissa did this for only one reason, because on her birthday she was always alone and no one celebrated it. And she didn't want these kids to ever know what it was like to be forgotten on their own holiday. So she asked Arnold to allow her to arrange at least something small, just for them, without receiving guests. Clarissa looked into the Duke's eyes and hoped that he would understand her feelings and allow her to have at least a small celebration. Arnold was a man of few words today and only dryly stated that the nanny could do whatever she wanted. But the most important condition was that no one should know about it, and that meant Arnold agreed. Although the young man reacted to this proposal in cold blood, the heroine was incredibly happy. She was sure that the Duke would refuse, but she still tried to insist on her own, given the bitter experience of her childhood. He and Eric were incredibly happy, and the young gentleman looked so happy while little Theodore burst into joyful laughter. The nanny tried her best to arrange a small, cozy celebration in honor of the young lord's birthday. On this day, they dressed the baby in festive clothes, and little Theodore sat on a soft pillow in anticipation of something magical. Clarissa baked a special gift for Theo, his favorite apple pie, the aroma of which filled the entire palace. The young gentleman also prepared for the baby's birthday celebration and wanted to give him his gift. In his hands was a soft, funny toy, which Eric held with great trepidation and enthusiasm. It was the same toy that he loved so much as a child, but it broke, and Eric tried his best to fix it. Now the nanny understood why the young master had been locked in his room all this time, and one of the maids eventually helped him. He decided to give his favorite toy to his brother, which the caring maid had sewn up, and it was a nice little gift. Eric put his whole soul into this gift, and it was a piece of him that he was ready to pass on to his brother. His chubby little hands touched his plush friend. It was an old toy worn out by time, but for Eric, it was priceless. Theo hugged the toy tightly to himself, and tears of joy sparkled in the boy's eyes. The little boy felt what a valuable gift his brother had given him. It was a sign of love and trust, a small symbol of their strong brotherly bond. It was so sweet that the nanny even burst into tears when she saw the happy faces of the two brothers. Little Theo stuck his hand into the festive apple pie and showed it to the young gentleman as if he wanted to thank him. The Duke's assistant just wanted to talk about today's celebration, but as they passed the door of the children's room, they heard joyful voices. They couldn't pass by and looked in to see what was going on in the nursery and saw something incredible. Clarissa was bursting into joyful laughter, young Theodore was holding a stuffed animal, and Eric was laughing loudly as he bit into an apple pie. The Duke adored these children, but decided to pass by and not interfere with the children's party, as if he was afraid of something. The assistant asked if the Duke wanted to join in as well, but Arnold coldly replied that he had no desire to do so, having stated that such things were absolutely not for him, although the assistant understood perfectly well that deep down, Arnold would probably like to be there. Several days passed after the sweet holiday, and early in the morning the baby was crying loudly again, lying in his cradle. Because the Duke was standing next to his crib again, and as soon as he felt his presence, Theo began to cry loudly. This time, the Duke decided to try to calm the child down in a different way, because he no longer wanted to put on a cute face. The heroes tried to understand what was going on, and this time the gentleman showed little Theodore the family jewel. Looking at the shiny stone, the baby noticed it and immediately stopped crying. When he showed the little boy the precious jewel, he fell silent in an instant, and it was simply amazing. Clarissa stood nearby and was also surprised, because for some reason this method worked today. During this time, the heroine delved into the research and realized that the dark magic emanating from Lord Theo had the same properties as the unique magic of the ducal family. At the same time, she realized that her own magic, which calms the baby, can also be completely unique. Unique magic refers to a special type that can only be possessed by representatives of ancient noble families. The heroine had heard that the nocturnal family also had their own unique magic, but she had never thought about it and was sure that unique magic was beyond her power. The magic stone that the Duke showed the baby was once a family heirloom of the girl's family, and Arnold confessed that, as he had thought, he could not yet return it to Clarissa as he had promised earlier. The heroine did not see anything terrible in this and admitted that the Duke could return the family jewel after the contract was completed. Magic stones tend to resonate with the owner's unique magical energy, and for some reason the lady hoped this stone could help Lord Theo. It was the nanny who suggested this idea to calm the baby down, and it looks like the experiment was a success. But the Duke understood that it seemed that it would not be possible to use the family jewel multiple times. The gem changed color more and more with each use, but the nanny was confident that they had bought a little time for the young lord. The assistant apologized for disturbing him and said that Lord Theo's nanny had returned, and he would like to introduce her to Clarissa. This girl's name was Maria. She used to serve in the knightly troops, and now she was going to take care of the lord as his nanny. It is said that Maria was formerly a servant and bodyguard to Lord Theo's mother, and her family came from a noble knightly family. In addition, the lady had an innate resistance to magic, which is why she was assigned to look after the baby. Now that the nanny and the magic stone finally appeared, Arnold suggested that Clarissa take a little rest, since she had been working hard all this time. She took care of the little lord day and night, tirelessly, and spent every minute next to him. It all happened in an instant, and probably the lady was not prepared for it, so she was even a little upset. In that case, she informed the Duke of a small request that she would like to fulfill before her departure. Thanks to Maria, the heroine was finally able to leave the estate and decided to return to her lands for a specific reason. There was a pendant with a dark red stone on her neck, and Clarissa wanted to thank Lord Eric for this pendant. When the young gentleman learned of the departure, he did not believe that the girl would immediately leave for her domain. The heroine was going to explore her family's unique magic because she knew nothing about it and believed that it could help the little lord. When the heroine told him about this, Eric asked to take her special amulet so that Clarissa's magic would be protected. This sign of attention surprised the girl. The amulet looked unusually beautiful, especially since it was an expensive thing. Eric asked not to misunderstand him, assuring that if something happened to the lady, the young lord would be very upset. The boy said this on purpose, but she understood perfectly well that this was his way of taking care of her, and even the assistant noticed the magic stone. He also had a special amulet hanging around his neck, which also protected the young man from troubles and evil magic. The assistant said that this amulet belonged to the previous generation, and it is unique in its kind. Previously, the magical amulet belonged to the Duke, and he gave it to Eric with all care, but now it has gone to the heroine. The amulet was not simple, and in its center was a magic stone, a special crystal that appears when a person first uses magic. This is why magic stones are so valuable, and giving one to someone is a sign of deepest trust and desire to protect. And this meant only one thing: Eric recognized the nanny as a reliable guardian, and looking at the amulet, she was incredibly happy. She carefully hid the amulet under her shirt so that this little secret would remain only with her. Now she often thought about the ducal family, little Theodore, and the use of magical abilities. And as she said goodbye to the Duke's house, she realized that it was here that she first used her magical powers. But there was only one strange thing: the magic stone never appeared, despite the fact that magic was used. It was quite possible that the heroine had used unique magic before without realizing it, and it was a pity that she didn't remember it. She finally returned to the orphanage, and the children were incredibly happy to see Lady Clarissa. The children rushed towards her, each of them trying to ask something, but most importantly, they wanted to know whether the lady had already finished her work. The kids surrounded the girl, confessing how incredibly they missed her, and all this time they tried to behave well. The heroine said that in fact she still works in the ducal house, she just had an unexpected vacation. As soon as the children found out about this, they immediately became upset because their beloved Clarissa would probably leave the orphanage again soon. The Duke's assistant arrived with the girl, and the kids mistook him for an older brother, immediately inviting him to play. The young man clearly didn't expect a bunch of children to rush towards him, and at that moment the lady clutched the amulet tightly, remembering Eric. Clarissa hadn't been to the shelter for a long time, and the first thing she did was head to her favorite office. She was overcome with strange sensations, memories of her mother, and after a long absence, everything here seemed very strange. After her father's death, she heard that her mother moved all the important documents and records to the estate. So the lady asked the maid to look for something about unique magic, books, documents, and important information, everything that could be found. A maid at the estate named Fee admitted that she never thought that Clarissa would one day work for a noble ducal family. But now she was incredibly happy to see the owner of the shelter, and the girl said that the Duke's children were incredibly cute. Although she didn't fully understand what was on Arnold's mind, he turned out to be a good person to her. Fee asked Milady to leave the care of the estate to the servants, because after the Duke's help, everything here had changed. She said they now had support and things were going much better than they had been before. Besides, Fee was grateful. Clarissa and her late mother saved many children, and also further jobs for many people. And she wanted the girl to finally find her happiness and sincerely admit it to her mistress. The lady really gave a lot to this shelter, but she didn't think at all about her life and well-being. Once back at the shelter, Clarissa realized that she had been living a completely different life all this time. While she worked here, she was sure that she was happy, even when she was constantly in the shelter with the children. But from the outside, it probably didn't look that way, and now the lady had absolutely no idea what happiness really was. Trying to sort out her thoughts, she slowly walked down the corridor of the shelter, but suddenly heard strange voices. The sounds were definitely coming from the yard, but the heroine immediately recognized one of these voices. An uninvited guest visited the shelter, while the Duke's knights tried to stop her, since entry here was strictly prohibited for outsiders. As Clarissa stepped out into the yard, she was overcome by a terrible feeling, because her cousin Annette was standing on the threshold of the shelter. The lady declared that she had come to see her dear sister, and the knights were obliged to let her through. The heroine responded angrily. She did not remember inviting her cousin to visit the shelter, and from the doorway asked her to return home. The lady started screaming, "Her name is Annette, and she is the younger sister of the owner of this estate, and also her cousin." Hearing Annette's nasty, squeaky voice from afar, the heroine understood that a major quarrel could happen now. The girl arrived without warning her at all, and this was very rude behavior on her part. That's why the owner of the shelter wasn't afraid to express her opinion, and without even approaching Annetta, said that she should immediately go home. The cousin did not expect that the lady could behave like that, and was indignant. Who was she anyway to decide what to do? Annetta became embittered from the first seconds, and did not know whose favor the owner of the shelter had won by asking if she really thought that a couple of guards could solve anything. This impudent lady slipped past the guards and threw herself into the arms of her supposedly beloved sister. Annette spoke in a squeaky voice. She came because she was worried about Clarissa, and many days had passed since she went to look for the family stone. Clarissa was not going to tolerate disrespectful behavior towards her and pushed her rude relative away. She said the Duke agreed to return the family stone on the condition that she work on his estate. Annetta couldn't believe that the girl had managed to achieve such success because Duke Vanderlick had a high title and great respect. The lady admitted that she had never imagined that the family stone would end up in the hands of the Duke himself, and now much became clear to her. Clarissa asked him not to pretend to be an impudent girl anymore because she knew perfectly well that it was she who sold the family stone to the jewelry merchant. Annette stole it from the box and sold it to the first person she met to earn pocket money. But unfortunately, Annetta didn't even imagine that the girl already knew everything about her lies and terrible betrayal. Annette tried to prove that she was not guilty of anything, and her sister allegedly accused her of something she did not do at all. She insisted that the girl herself had lost the family heirloom and was now trying to shift the blame onto her beloved relative. But Clarissa no longer needed to explain anything, and it had long been clear to her what kind of relatives surrounded her and what they really wanted to achieve. Annetta began to act out the performance and cried loudly in front of the guards as if she had been humiliated and set up. Nobody understood what was going on here, but one thing was clear. The brazen liar was trying to achieve something, and she had come to the shelter for a reason. Clarissa watched the false performance and understood perfectly well that nothing good could be expected from Annette. After all her childhood the brazen deceiver did was set up her relative. And she definitely came again to take something dear from the heroine, something so valuable that it rightfully belongs to Clarissa. My uncle and aunt showed everything perfectly with their behavior. They bathed in luxury their whole lives and lived on the family's money, and also took the title and fortune. The brazen deceiver named Annette behaved completely differently. This girl was completely different. Annette stole from the lady little by little, each time taking advantage of her kindness, as if peeling off her skin layer by layer. Even when Clarissa tried to study, her guardians said that the girl was incapable of learning and very stupid. The books that she valued so much, Annette simply took and destroyed overnight, specifically so that she would not achieve anything. Annette always acted in the most vile way and made sure that all the teachers hated Clarissa. Once, a terrible incident even happened, and Annette was again involved in it, wanting to frame her sister. Annette complained to one of the teachers that Clarissa was constantly making fun of her and bullying her, making stupid jokes at her expense. She even intentionally hurt herself once so that her fiancé would believe her lie, but no one even listened to the fact that the girl was not guilty of anything. The brazen deceiver turned everyone against her sister, who was completely indifferent to her lies. And thus she ensured that all the teachers, servants, and residents of the estate hated her sister and considered her a terrible person. When the heroine realized that all this was part of Annette's insidious plan, her heart was broken into pieces. But at that moment it was already too late. No one believed in the girl anymore, and it was for this reason that she decided to run away to the house that her mother left her. There she finally found her peace, but now the impudent Annette has appeared in her life again, but she has never even been to this estate. After the heroine ran away from their house, she finally regained her strength and was no longer that weak girl. At that moment, the heroine noticed the amulet and remembered the noble Eric, who had given it to her with all his heart before leaving. He wanted the nanny to return safely, so he decided to give her the family jewel that could protect her. Since the heroine's mother died, no one worried about her anymore and never expected her return. But now there are people in her life who are waiting for her, who value her and respect her incredibly simply because she is with them, and this made Clarissa feel great happiness. Perhaps, even if only for a short time, Clarissa became the one Lord Eric trusted for the first time. And holding the magic pendant in her hands, this time she definitely decided not to let Annette do whatever she wanted. Clarissa said confidently, the girl can blame her for whatever she wants, but she will no longer allow her to mock her life. Until the contract was fulfilled, Annette could not return the family stone, no matter what she did or how hard she tried. The heroine turned away sharply, while the impudent deceiver tried to convince her that this was clearly some kind of misunderstanding. Annette certainly didn't expect such behavior from Clarissa, because she had never behaved like that before, and on the contrary, indulged her cousin's opinion. When the girl turned away from her, Annette rushed to her, screaming for her sister to listen to her and not abandon her in such a situation. She grabbed her by the waist with such force that Clarissa even felt a lot of pain, because she almost tripped and fell. She was holding a precious pendant in her hands, and Annette noticed that the girl had a magic stone hanging on her chest and asked if it was really a relic. Annette whispered that her little sister was being too cruel, and if she had a relic, it would be worth starting with the inheritance. The deceiver asked her to simply fulfill the contracts and continue to work for her sister, but this time the heroine could not stand it and hit her cousin in the face. This magic stone was not the family heirloom that Annette had already set her sights on. A red mark from the blow appeared on the liar's cheek, and she asked why, in that case, Clarissa was wearing this pendant. The lady asked not to touch the jewel with her dirty hands, and she wore it because this thing is really dear to her. It was the first time Annette had seen her sister defend her opinions so boldly, and before she had always been timid. She no longer knew how to hurt Clarissa and said that she was acting too arrogantly just because she was her sister. All this time, she considered the girl a noblewoman who did not know how to use magic and called her a laughingstock, but at that moment, magic fell upon the villainess like a whirlwind. The power of the magic pendant was incredibly great, and this was the very case when the heroine needed its protection. But the girl understood that this might be bad, and if it continued, everyone might be in danger. It was not just a decoration, but a shield woven from ancient runes and light magic, the only defense against Annette's insidious spells. The pendant, a faithful protector, absorbed her anger, turning it against Annette. Each time she made a new attempt, the pendant became brighter, and Clarissa's powers grew stronger. The magic cast on this pendant turned out to be much stronger than the heroine imagined, and even she understood that she might not have time to dodge it. The magical pendant given to her by young Lord Eric shimmered with an incredibly strong light on Clarissa's chest. The ground beneath the villainess's feet cracked, as if splitting under the pressure of an invisible force. Annette staggered, lost her balance, and fell to the ground. Annette's face was distorted with pain and rage. Sparks flew from her eyes, and her hands trembled, losing control of her anger. Clarissa, breathing heavily, watched the defeated Annette, and her rage, of which she was so proud, was powerless before the pure, bright stream. At that moment, the girl remembered the words of young Eric. The magic stone will definitely help her, and he wants her to return safe and sound. She raised the pendant to her lips and kissed it tenderly, as if in gratitude it was not just a magical amulet, but a symbol of the love and devotion of the young Lord Eric. Annetta realized that this magic stone was of quite a high level, and right now it protected its owner. Annette was choking with rage, her fingers convulsively clutching the hem of her silk dress, and her thin lips turned into a thin, angry line. The villainess felt an uncontrollable hatred growing in her chest, hatred for Clarissa, for her innocence and naivety, which were so irritating. But most of all, Annette hated herself for underestimating this pathetic nuisance, for letting her get away, for allowing her flawless plan to misfire. So she decided to act in a different way and suddenly started running to the side, which Clarissa did not expect at all. Probably, Annette was going to raise such a storm that this world would shake from her wrath. At that moment, the heroine saw that one of the children from the orphanage was standing next to a tree, and even this fear. The villainess screamed, "Her sister will regret it," and was about to show what happens when she is challenged. Clarice shouted at the boy to run away as quickly as possible. She rushed to the boy so that no one would harm him, because Annette had just snapped her fingers and was also going to use strong magic. Clarissa hugged the boy and shielded him with her whole body, and the next second an unexpected magic happened, which turned out to be a protective spell. Annetta was simply furious because a powerful spell had just been reflected by light magic, and she was powerless. As if from nowhere, the Duke's assistant himself appeared and immediately asked if everything was all right with the lady. It was Lord Rusty, and it was he who had just used the protective magic that had repelled Annetta's dark forces. Rusty wasn't particularly strong in offensive spells, but he had no problems with defensive spells at all, and he used them skillfully. He knew how quickly the magic stones were depleted, but as long as the shield was active, everything was under complete control. Rusty didn't expect the villain to dare attack a small child, and he happened to be there at the perfect time. But the evil liar was not going to back down and screamed, "Does her sister really think that some kind of magic shield can stop her," declaring that it is useless. At that moment, the heroine became frightened, and even the best mentors could not withstand Annette's evil magic. Lord Rusty protected the heroine along with the baby from the orphanage, and she was incredibly grateful to him. Officially, he was only the Duke's secretary and asked not to reveal secret information about his abilities. Lord Rusty had remained secretly at his lordship's side all this time to intervene in case of danger, and in other words, he had kept it a secret. The young man's duty was to protect the Duke, and that is why he was constantly by his side to help at any moment. Clarissa learned a huge secret about the Duke's assistant today, and at the most difficult moment, this man unexpectedly appeared nearby. She looked at him with admiration and concern. Lord Rusty, usually reserved and taciturn, now seemed the embodiment of strength and determination. After all, if something happened to her, it would be a problem for Lord Theodore, and Annette couldn't believe that none of her powerful spells worked. The young man also had a family heirloom of the Duke hanging on his chest, and showing it to the villainess, Rusty asked if she recognized this item. An identical stone hung around her sister's neck, and it had been personally presented by His Grace, the Grand Duke Vanderlick. Lord Rusty informed her that as a noblewoman the girl should understand what this meant, and her magic spells would no longer help her. This time Annette had gone too far, and the young man could not allow her to be harmed. Behind his words there was deep affection and perhaps something more. He approached the villainess and angrily declared that raising a hand against her would be like attacking the house of the Grand Duke, and if the lady insisted, she must be ready to pay for it with her life. His eyes burned with righteous anger at Annette, who apparently had crossed the line, and this time she was finally truly scared. Annette, defeated and humiliated, fled, the magic of which she was so proud crumbling to dust under the onslaught of the combined forces directed against her. Lord Rusty smiled and was sure that everything was now in perfect order and that the girl would never return again. She took with her only anger and determination to take revenge on everyone involved in her downfall, and Clarissa was incredibly glad of it. The magic stone saved her from the evil deceiver who had done nothing but hinder the heroine and ruin her dreams her entire life. Someday the heroine will definitely return and thank his lordship and Lord Eric for the care and devotion that she now felt. She was incredibly interested in how the Duke was doing, and at the same time, the young man was desperately trying to help children in need. On the roof of a high tower stood an evil criminal, threatening a little boy and offering the Duke to accept his conditions if he wanted to save the hostages. Many people were in their power and were now tied up, and their lives depended solely on the Duke's decision. The criminal warned Arnold not to try to do anything that was not according to his rules, because if he tried, he promised to kill everyone in the castle. The father of one of the hostages, a merchant from the trading company Vanderleek, tearfully begged the Duke to save his child. The criminals were sure that the Duke had to prove that he was a heartless ruler and was ready to sacrifice even children. Arnold tried to think through every step he took and every action of the criminals so that none of the hostages would be harmed. He asked whether the bandits really seriously thought that he would give in, just because they had a huge number of people as hostages. At that moment, the boy, whom the robber was holding tightly in his arms, became incredibly frightened and began to tremble with fear. Wunderlich slowly raised his black-gloved hand, powerful magic flaring from within, filling the air with a palpable electrical tension. Their smug grins turned to confusion and then panic. The magic the Wunderlich was about to use was an ancient power, sleeping deep within his line, a power capable of transforming reality itself. The robber put forward his conditions. The Duke had to give up the child or give up the magic stones. They underestimated not only the power of the Grand Duke, but also the price of ignorance, and the fate of the bandits was sealed. At that moment, a knight captain named Marvin, a noble lord, appeared and brought knights with him for protection. The bandits took the child hostage, but they knew what a fearsome reputation the Grand Duke's house had, or perhaps they simply did not want to believe the rumors. Marvin was sure that the Duke could do something terrible at any moment, and noted that the captain, as always, had sharp statements. Arnold has long had serious suspicions about who is behind all this chaos that brings destruction. Marvin was waiting for an order from the commander, because if a fight began, it would end in bloodshed and many casualties, but now it was necessary to save the children. The bandits, confident in their numbers and impunity, underestimated not only the Duke's power, but also the depth of his patience. The whisper of the wind grew louder, turning into a deafening roar. The ground beneath the bandits' feet trembled, and a cold, inhuman fire flared up in the Duke's eyes. The robbers, in their arrogance, imagined themselves to be the masters of this place, but now they were only pawns in someone else's dark game, doomed to experience the full depth of despair in the face of an irresistible force. The Duke showed no pity or sympathy, only cold, calculating rage. His magic did not simply destroy, it tormented the soul, broke the will, turned everything that was dear to him into dust. Marvin looked with a grin at the monstrous magic, at the incredible destructive power of the Great Lord. But it wasn't just the power. A human normally wouldn't be able to control strong magic with such precision, and even the hostages held their breath in fear. The Duke asked Marvin to calm the others down, since he had deliberately left the senior officers alive. The commander loudly commanded the knights to be immediately ready to carry out his next order. While the bandits were defeated by destructive magic, the knights rushed to help the hostages, of which there were too many. They managed to free the merchant's son, who immediately rushed to his father in tears because the horror he had experienced was too terrible. The father tried to calm his son, assuring him that he was now safe and everything would definitely be fine. And the Duke only watched modestly as he once again managed to punish the dirty bandits and restore justice. At that moment, he turned his attention to the boy sitting in a black robe and hood, next to whom stood one of his assistants. Arnold approached the young gentleman to ask if he was okay and if he had received any injuries. The boy whispered back that he was incredibly grateful to the Duke for saving them and that he was completely fine. For some reason, this particular boy seemed strange to Arnold and he wanted to approach him, asking where he was kidnapped from. The assistant whispered something in the master's ear, and after his words he seemed to go mad, wanting to punish the robbers even more. The knights managed to catch and tie up the main robber, who was about to appear before their court right now. Marvin and the Duke captured the leader, and it was he who organized the gang that captured civilians and took them hostage. Probably the leader of the gang was confident of his impunity, and now he looked at the Grand Duke with a brazen grin. The Duke immediately decided to find out how much the chief robber knew, but then pretended not to understand what was being discussed. Arnold asked if the robber knew who exactly he had taken hostage, and he was talking about one of the captives. One of the captured children was of noble blood, and if the Duke had not been in time, he would have died, and the miserable life of a robber would not have been enough to pay for what he had done. The robber told the Duke to listen to him carefully, assuring him that he was only following orders. During the search, the knights found fire traps among the rocks, and it seemed that these people were going to eventually burn down the entire cave. The knight ran in with important information, and the gang leader swore that he knew absolutely nothing about it and wanted to tell who hired them. The Duke grabbed the bandit by the hair, angrily declaring that he'd better hope he had information that Arnold still didn't know. The tower was freed from the bandits' clutches, and all the prisoners finally found their freedom. Marvin was amazed at how quickly the Duke understood everything, but in reality, Arnold simply sensed the mana and cruel intent of the attacker. One of the boys was kidnapped on the territory of Count Nocturnal, which means the trail leads to the family of one woman who probably knows a lot. After meeting Annette, Clarissa was finally safe and no longer subject to the evil spell of the Count's family. Her family's unique magic was said to have the ability to purify and remove dark forces such as evil or curses. The heroine wondered if her magic was working on Lord Theo, then it meant that he really was under a terrible curse. She went to the ducal mansion with Lord Rusty, and as soon as the heroine saw him from the carriage window, warmth spread through her soul. Her heart was filled with happiness, as if after a long winter the gentle sun had finally come. Eric held a joyful Theo in his arms, and this image seemed to Clarissa the most beautiful sight in the world. Clarissa walked over to hug the children, her heart pounding with anticipation. Little Theo stretched out his chubby little hands towards her, a gesture full of trust and tenderness, a gesture that melted away all the remnants of doubt and anxiety in Clarissa's heart. She picked up Theo, he buried his face in her neck, and at that moment, the world for her narrowed to the size of this small lump, to the feeling of his breath on her skin. Clarissa hugged the baby tighter. All worries and cares receded into the background, leaving only her, Theo, and the boundless love that filled her heart. The young gentleman stood aside and was glad. It seemed that the nanny had returned safe and sound again, and it was all thanks to the magic amulet. Eric was at a complete loss as to how to express his emotions, and even Lord Rusty asked him if he had nothing to say. The young gentleman was very embarrassed, but he was incredibly happy to see the nanny again, and admitted that he was glad for her speedy return. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness, a moment Clarissa wished could stop forever. Clarissa hugged the children, baby Theo and young Lord Eric. She felt their little hearts beating and realized the responsibility that lay on her shoulders. Lord Rusty smiled the happiest smile in the world because it was the first time he had seen children show such boundless love to someone. But suddenly the young gentleman confessed that he had something important to tell the nanny about Theo, and it happened quite recently. After the failed capture, Clarissa's uncle, Count Nocturnal, was incredibly angry and had no idea what to do now that the mercenaries had failed. His wife knew that at this rate they would never be able to get the family stone back, and that was exactly what they were trying to achieve now. But the evil Count had another plan in mind, one he was incredibly confident in. Eric asked the nanny and her assistant to keep a close eye on baby Theo because that was what he wanted to show them. He carefully placed the child on the soft carpet and released his hand, which little Theo had been clutching tightly all this time. Seeing Clarissa so happy, sharing with her the joy of Theo's first achievements, was a great pleasure for him. Just a short time ago, Theo was just a helpless baby lying in a crib, and now he was tottering and unsteady on his tiny legs, exploring the world. The first steps of baby Theo caused incredibly happy emotions in the heroine, and she saw how the young gentleman tried to move his little legs. She was delighted. It was simply amazing. But suddenly Eric said that this was far from all that little Theo had learned. And this was really only a small part, because during this time the baby learned to stand on his two legs confidently and could even stand on the edge of the crib. The baby had perfect balance, and it turned out that he and Eric had been training together while they waited for everyone to return to the estate. This was a huge progress for the baby, and at that moment the heroine realized how quickly children grow, because little Theo was already walking on his own. She understood that time was flying inexorably, and that Theo would very soon grow up and become independent. But while he was little, he needed her care and protection. She would be there to support him and guide him. And each of these moments was special for her, filled with motherly love and pride. Clarissa thought they should definitely show this to the Duke, but Lord Rusty said that the gentleman was currently on an important expedition, and it looked like he wouldn't be back soon. Clarissa pulled Theo close, feeling his warm breath as he wrapped his small arms around her and held her tightly. But for some reason Eric was not sure that the gentleman would be happy with the first steps, so the nanny promised to definitely mention this in the report. And since the young gentleman could now stand, she decided to try making his first pair of shoes. The Lord admitted that it was an excellent idea, but they could not call the shoemaker while the Duke was away and act without his permission. Eric was upset to hear that the Duke would probably not return soon, but the little boots were needed right now. The nanny took responsibility into her own hands and suggested that Eric simply buy shoes for little Theo himself so that he could finally begin to explore this huge world. The nanny, holding Eric's hand tightly, and together with Lord Rusty, went to a small town in search of cozy shoes for little Theo. All this time the heroine remained in the estate. This was the first time when she simply found time and went for a walk. Eric noticed that Lady Clarissa was a little worried and asked if everything was okay with her. The lady just thought she was very sorry that little Theo couldn't go with them, but now they were in for an incredible walk. The young child was not alone, because Maria was now looking after the young lord and asked him to leave all the troubles to her. But for some reason, when Maria stayed with the baby, the young gentleman was not at all happy about it. So he asked the nanny if it was true that tomorrow she would again be almost inseparable from little Theo, and he really wanted that. The nanny had only recently returned to the estate, but today Eric admitted that he would like Clarissa to be with him and think only of him. Not expecting such frankness from the young lord, the heroine was surprised because he was always withdrawn and did not show his emotions. But today, the boy seemed to have changed, and he happily held the nanny's hand, promising to show her the most wonderful places. They went into a shoe repair shop, where a store employee carefully showed them the cutest little shoes. The heroes ordered one pair of shoes, and the lady promised to contact them when the shoes for the baby were ready. Clarissa wanted to make this day special, and presented young Eric with a gift from the bottom of her heart. The box contained a pair of brown sandals for the boy to wear when he played with little Theo in the garden. Clarissa could tell from Eric's admiring look that no one had ever given the boy gifts before, and he didn't even understand why she did it. Carefully holding the box in her hands, the lady admitted that this was a small thanks for the magical amulet that saved her life. She told Eric that the magic pendant really helped her in a dangerous situation, and it was thanks to the boy that she was now safe. She finally managed to convince the boy to accept the gift because Eric had refused the gift but was now ready to accept it. Eric invited Clarissa to try the city's famous pastries at the pastry shop. They chatted about trifles, laughed, and joked. Later, wandering through the narrow alleys, they came across a small flower shop. Handing the flowers to Clarissa, he smiled shyly. Clarissa was deeply touched. She took the bouquet, inhaled its delicate aroma, and looked at Eric with gratitude. After a pleasant walk, the hero stopped at a huge fountain, located in the very center of a small cozy town. The city was noisy around, but for Clarissa, all the sounds merged into a pleasant melody, accompanying her good mood. Clarissa looked at the passers-by with a smile and enjoyed her first walk. The sun's rays caressed her face, and a light breeze played with the curls that were falling out of her hair. There were so many terrible rumors about the lands of the Grand Duke, but seeing the joyful local residents, the lady realized that all the rumors were untrue. Now, here on a busy street in the company of young Lord Eric, she felt free and happy. Local residents gathered in the city center, and Lord Rusty reported that it seemed the Duke had finally returned from the expedition. The heroes went to greet him. They stopped behind the huge crowd that surrounded the venerable gentleman. But Arnold did not return alone from this expedition, and right in front of him on a horse sat the same boy from captivity. Looking at the boy, Clarissa noticed an incredible resemblance because this child had something special. His bright scarlet eyes stood out against his pale face, and the color of his eyes was exactly the same as the Duke's. The locals began to whisper that there was a child next to his lordship, but it was definitely not Lord Eric, and the ladies thought that the Duke probably had another son. Everyone was sure that the Duke was not married, and assumed that this was his illegitimate child, delighted by this news, while Clarissa and Eric looked on in surprise. They asked Rusty's assistant to explain what was going on, but the young man admitted that he himself knew nothing and had no idea who this child was. But the boy was incredibly similar to the Duke. His refined appearance spoke of noble blood. They soon returned from their walk, and Maria greeted the residents of the estate with respect, holding baby Theo in her arms. She carefully handed the baby over to Clarissa, and fortunately, nothing terrible happened during their absence. Clarissa decided to ask Maria about the Duke, but the nanny only looked at her with the same surprised look. Seeing that Clarissa had just returned, Arnold asked where the nanny had been all this time. She said that she and Eric had gone to buy Lord Theo his first pair of shoes, and it was unexpected news for the Duke. Clarissa couldn't find the words to describe her admiration and just smiled a happy smile. Young Lord Theo immediately demonstrated his skills by standing on two legs right on the Duke's palm. The lady was afraid that the Duke might be angry, but the young man only looked at little Theo with care. Suddenly, the gentleman's cold face became soft and pleasant. He admitted that they had done a wonderful job. Clarissa didn't fully understand the man's feelings, but now she definitely saw that Arnold was happy. The lady wore the magic pendant without taking it off, and at that moment the Duke noticed it because he had never seen it on Clarissa's neck before, as a family heirloom. He immediately wondered where the pendant came from, but Eric immediately admitted that it was he who gave the magic pendant to the nanny. The Duke probably didn't expect the boy to do something like that, and he had no idea about it. Eric admitted that Lady Clarissa was now a person for their family that they definitely couldn't do without. The boy spoke such sincere words for the first time. The nanny was very touched when he said it. He immediately turned away because he was embarrassed to admit that the nanny was at least very important to him. The Duke had never heard Eric treat anyone with such respect, and he merely said modestly that he understood everything. Surely Eric himself did not expect to utter these words, after which he felt mixed emotions. Arnold walked up to the boy and stroked his head carefully, because Rusty had already told him all the details. For the first time, the boy felt care and support from the cold-blooded Duke, and he had just called him a good boy. Eric was incredibly pleased to receive attention from Arnold, because before their relationship had been very cold. But Clarissa was the happiest of all, and she really hoped that their relationship would remain smooth and warm. Arnold said that he would like to introduce Eric and Clarissa to someone, and this meeting will take place right now. He asked to get ready and go with him to meet the unknown guest. None of the heroes even had a clue who it could be, and Eric and the nanny exchanged glances, understanding each other's feelings. Little Theo was now with Maria, and the heroes were getting ready to meet someone. A boy with blonde hair stood next to the Duke and Rusty, and Arnold said that due to some circumstances he had to stay at the estate for a while. It was the same young man with bright red eyes. His name was William, and this was their first meeting face to face. Clarissa hadn't imagined it last time this young man, up close, really did look incredibly similar to Duke Albert. The young gentleman came up to greet the uninvited guest, and he also saw this boy for the first time. He shook William's hand and admitted that he was incredibly pleased to meet the new resident of the estate. William had just arrived, so the Duke was going to show him around the palace to make the boy feel comfortable. Rusty immediately took the young master to his new room, and this boy was also a lord. Clarissa had noticed the similarity in appearance for good reason, and she was eager to find out who this young gentleman was. Albert said that William was Eric's free brother, and no one expected to see another relative of the Duke today. But his mother and the Duke were never officially married, and it turns out that this boy is an illegitimate child. William was a blood relative, but his situation was difficult, so Albert warned Eric not to get too close to him. Eric understood Albert perfectly, since he was an adopted son and his situation was completely different. Now the Duke turned to the lady and was about to tell her the peculiarities of the nocturnal family line. It seemed to him that Clarissa was flying somewhere in the clouds and was not listening to him at all, but at that very second she said that she was listening attentively to Albert. With the Duke's permission, she offered to provide a written report on the matter later, and Albert did not expect at all that the nanny would respond to his request so quickly, thereby proving that she really listened to him attentively. After meeting the unexpected guest, the heroes sat silently in the children's room while little Theodore slept soundly. He was snoring sweetly in his crib, next to the plush toy his beloved brother had given him for his birthday. And all this time, Clarissa's thoughts were occupied with only one thing, that his lordship really did have a secret child. She couldn't believe that this was really true, and tried her best to prepare a report for him. Among the respectable nobility, illegitimate children were not so rare, but Clarissa was still very surprised. She looked at Eric, who was also sitting silently, perplexed, and probably thinking about something. The boy looked incredibly thoughtful, and all this time after meeting William, he did not say a word. Clarissa turned to the young gentleman, and he even flinched in surprise. To ease the tension a little, the nanny decided to suggest that the boy go for a walk with the stroller in which baby Theo was sleeping. During all this time, the nanny exchanged a few words with Lord William, who was now sitting with the family at the dinner table. To be honest, the situation was quite delicate, and the nanny didn't even know how to talk to this boy. Suddenly, Eric asked how the lady felt when she suddenly had a stepsister. Eric heard that Annetta was originally the girl's cousin, but her status soon changed. Clarissa admitted that everything was fine because, after all, William was also the boy's brother. When she first met Annetta, at first she was even a little happy, but then she realized that they did not get along at all, and for the heroine, it was even more lonely than being alone, which is why Eric couldn't find a place for himself. The nanny decided to ask what the young gentleman thought about Lord William, because from now on they would have to live together. In response, Eric didn't even know what to say, and today he saw for the first time a boy who turned out to be his relative. But today, not only Lord William appeared at the estate, but also a strange black cat. Little Theo immediately noticed the animal sitting on the tree and turned his attention to the black cat. While the baby was crawling on the grass, a new resident of the estate approached him and greeted the young lord. Theo extended his hands to the boy, and he immediately felt a kind aura coming from him. William immediately realized that in front of him was little Theodore, who looked at the new guest with admiring eyes. He sat down on the soft grass in front of the baby and immediately realized that Theodore was the second son of the Grand Duke. At that moment, the same black cat approached the boys and meowed loudly throughout the yard. Theo saw a real cat for the first time in his life, and it really caught his attention. The animal turned out to be very friendly, and the cat immediately approached the boys so that they could pet it. But little Theo still didn't understand at all how to handle animals, and only abruptly grabbed the black cat by the tail. William told the baby how to be kind and gentle with animals and showed him how to pet a cat so that it would purr and be happy. The boys spent all this time together, and William showed young Theo funny faces which made him laugh throughout the yard. The baby clapped his hands and was happy while William continued to make faces and play with the baby. He found Theo to be an incredibly funny and sweet child, and William really enjoyed spending time with him. The baby was incredibly cheerful, and the young gentleman began to think that he must be living very well in this house. This baby is clearly surrounded by warmth and care, and the people living on the estate love him very much. William was here for a reason. He was accompanying a special commissioner for internal inspection, but he was suddenly captured by bad people. The baby listened to his stories with fascination, while William played carefree with the young lord. The affectionate cat sat with them, and thanks to the fact that the Duke had sheltered the boy, the guards were supposed to come for him soon. William didn't even know how long he would stay in this house, but while he was here, he decided to be happy. At that moment, Eric and the nanny ran up to them, worried, because they didn't even notice how Lord Theo crawled away from them. The nanny saw that the baby was okay and immediately calmed down, and all this time she and the boy were worried that the baby was lost. And what was her surprise when she saw Lord William, who had been watching the baby all this time. The nanny apologized and admitted that she was very sorry, because she and Eric didn't even notice when the baby crawled across the grass. They had indeed taken their eyes off the baby, and young Lord William knew it at once, asking whether the ducal house really has problems with qualified nannies who cannot look after a baby. Theo stood up for the nanny and stated that it was he who lost sight of the child, and Clarissa was not to blame for anything. William asked if Eric meant to say that if the baby had been kidnapped by bad people, it still wouldn't have been the nanny's fault. The young gentleman desperately stood up for Clarissa, and even after the boy's words, he declared that she was not guilty of anything. The lady insisted that whatever the reason, it was she who failed to keep an eye on the little child. William found the whole thing too touching and admitted that it wasn't such a bad thing. He believed it was better to be such a person, kind and sincere, than someone who only flatters or lies. He extended his hand to the young gentleman and offered to become true friends who would never deceive each other. Eric stopped in bewilderment, and William asked if he really didn't want to be friends and perhaps wanted to become Dick's friend. The heroine thought, William and Dick, and she had definitely heard these names somewhere before. She picked up a joyful Theo and asked the boys to wait, trying to understand what was happening between them. There was a reason his name was William, and Clarissa was sure that she knew that name for sure, and as soon as she realized this, she did not believe what was happening. Because standing before them was not just a boy, but Prince William Hyde himself, the first prince of the Kingdom of Odoron. All this time, the heroine thought that the boy was the Duke's illegitimate son, but it really turned out to be very funny, and she was wrong. Clarissa had never seen him in person, so she didn't understand, but the ducal and royal families were close relatives. Therefore, the external resemblance to Albert is not surprising, and William was Dick's elder brother, and Prince Dick was the second prince. And since everyone finally understood who William was, the boy cheerfully suggested that everyone play together. They decided to play tag because the children needed to move, run, and jump as much as possible. They quickly chose who would enter, and it turned out to be a boy named William, since Eric and Theo lost at rock, paper, scissors. The boy ran as fast as he could and declared that Eric would have to catch him, and he ran away so quickly that the young lord didn't even have time to notice. Finally, Eric had someone to play with, a boy his own age, and they looked incredibly happy now. Prince William and Prince Dick turned out to be half-brothers, and now the boys were just spending time carefree with each other. Clarissa heard somewhere that there was a dispute in the royal palace about who would become the heir and take the throne. Now the court was split into two factions, one supporting the first prince and the other faction supporting the other. There had been a fierce struggle for the throne between the young boys since childhood, and that was why Albert warned Eric in advance. It was not for nothing that he told Eric not to get too close to the young master, who could certainly become the heir to the throne. Now Clarissa understood why the Duke was so worried, because William was not an ordinary child at all. But Eric didn't need any problems at all. He didn't have a high title and was just the adopted child of a duke. While the boys were running, Eric was unable to catch up with the agile prince who was constantly evading him. Each time it seemed to him that he was about to catch him, but William slipped away again, disappearing without a trace ahead. Eric was trying so hard to catch the prince that he didn't even notice how he tripped over a stone and fell straight to the ground. William stopped beside him and declared that he was sure that an alliance with the Duke's house would be a great advantage. He laughed at Eric, who had just fallen, calling him too weak a duke, which he was probably wrong about. Eric was hurt by these words because he had long felt that he was not worthy of the ducal title. The boy sadly stated that perhaps he really was not fit to be the heir and would never take it. William noticed that Eric's mood changed dramatically as soon as he mentioned the ducal title. Suddenly, the boy became furious and declared that he did not want the entire family of the Grand Duke to be judged only by his behavior and skills. All this time, William had been running from Eric and knew that it was very easy to dodge him, but now the boy had come too close to him. And the little prince did not even notice how the young gentleman touched him with his hand, which meant that the game was over. Eric managed to outwit William, who even forgot that the game was still going on. Little Theo clapped his hands happily, because all this time he had been watching attentively as Eric tried to catch up with the young prince. It seems that young Master Eric has won today, and even if he was not clever, he was much more cunning. William sat on the grass and laughed joyfully, realizing that he himself had no idea how Eric would fool him. Eric carefully gave the boy his hand and said important words. What one brother lacks, the other always makes up for. This is what his adoptive father taught him, and the boy was ready to lend a helping hand to his friend. Now William realized what the Duke really was, a wonderful man with a big soul. William grabbed his hand and Eric helped him to his feet, brushing the grass off his clothes. Eric felt a special connection forming between them. At that moment, Eric realized that there was something more between them than just a passing help. He saw gratitude and admiration in William's eyes, and he felt warmth in his heart as they stood side by side, two boys, different in status, but united by a common desire to be friends. The Duke watched all this closely, and he was incredibly worried that Eric would become friends with William and would miss him. Albert looked quite serious and realized that now was the time to do something. The commander of the knights stood next to him in the office, and Albert confidently declared that it seemed time to act. The commander of the knights understood the order given by the Duke, which he had to carry out immediately. After a fun game, the boys, along with the nanny and Theo, were sitting at a summer table, at which point William decided to ask for forgiveness. He knew he'd said some nasty things to Eric just to see how the boy would react in that situation. Eric felt bad at the time, but after William's apology, he understood everything and the prince was indeed just testing him. The Duke always said that you need to learn to understand people, and only in such situations can you understand who your true friend is. William wondered how Eric managed to understand that he was truly a good person and did not wish him harm. William suggested that they just forget what happened before and officially become real friends this time. Eric had no friends at all, but suddenly the boy confidently declared that he would refuse such an offer. William's eyes widened because the prince certainly didn't expect the boy to give up on friendship right then. He even jumped up from his chair a little angry because he was wondering why Eric refused to be friends with him. Eric considered himself the future Duke and stated that he could not befriend the first prince without the permission of the current Duke. It was William's fault, and he probably shouldn't have mentioned the situation, but the boys still wanted to remain friends on equal terms. At that moment, the future young Duke suddenly grabbed the baby in his arms and ran as fast as he could. William watched him go, and turning around, Eric said that the prince would drive next time, and then he would definitely be unlikely to catch him. The anger turned into a joyful smile because William realized that Eric was just trying to act like a real future adult Duke. Eric was happily offended and with little Theo in his arms, and the prince laughed and tried to catch up with him, and the happiest of all was Clarissa, who for the first time saw the young gentleman so happy. While she was watching the boys, she didn't even notice how the Duke came up and asked what was going on here. Albert clearly made it clear to Eric and told the boy not to get close to William under any circumstances. The nanny heard the Duke's words perfectly well, but she just really wanted the boys to play together. She asked the Duke if he intended to oppose Prince William, and this was probably the reason. The Duke's house remained neutral, and Albert had no intention of taking sides, and he certainly did not want to take part in it. Clarissa decided to find out whether Lord Eric had taken part in this decision, or whether no one had even asked his opinion. Arnold was surprised why the nanny was asking about the young gentleman, since he was still just a child. It was not without reason that she asked Eric what he thought of Lord William, in order to understand how he felt about this boy. Then Eric didn't know what to answer, but he understood perfectly well how he would act next. He confidently stated that he would like to get to know William better, because you can't say that you like or dislike someone until you really know the person. Based on the young master's words, the nanny said in a serious tone that she would like to respect the young lord's wishes. She asked Albert not to worry, because in the end Eric was perfectly aware of what he was doing and who he was friends with. He also understands perfectly well his role as heir, and after her words, the Duke simply turned around and left. This method probably didn't work, and the nanny was very upset, but she understood perfectly well that this also concerned Eric. Albert approached William and asked him to come with him to discuss some important matters. A happy little Theo waved cheerfully at the young prince as Eric watched him leave with excitement. The Duke was going to have a serious talk with the young gentleman because it was not without reason that he brought him to his estate. During this time, a full report had already been compiled on the case of the kidnapping of the little prince, who was captured by robbers. William was not supposed to be there at all, but by chance he ended up with the prisoners, but was saved by the Duke. Albert warned that the boy's testimony might be needed to bring the organizer to justice. William realized that this was indeed the second prince's faction, and that he and the Duke's house were the target. Albert had already sent a message to the Guardian, the Duke of Baritone, and as far as the royal family was concerned, he had done everything as William had asked. William thanked the Duke for his help and asked for forgiveness for dragging the Duke's house into a conflict over the throne. Even if there was a connection between these houses, the boy was the first prince, and the Duke asked him not to bow his head so easily and casually. The boy smiled happily and realized that the Duke had given incredible support to the royal family, who would be grateful to him. All this time, Eric stood near the door of Arnold's office and tried to eavesdrop on the conversation, but unfortunately he did not hear anything. Nanny noticed Lord Eric trying to eavesdrop, and it was a little unlike him. As he stood near the door, it suddenly opened and he, with the baby in his arms, fell to the floor. He was incredibly lucky because little Theodore landed softly on William, who also fell with them. The Duke came out of the office and saw that for some reason the nanny and Eric were also standing near the door. Looking at each other, they realized that the Duke might get really angry now, and they tried to hide from his sight as quickly as possible. They ran down the hallway while the nanny screamed that she and Eric were so sorry. On the one hand, it looked very funny, and William was not at all angry at Erica. He only asked if they had been waiting for his return all this time, which was why they were standing at the office door. Eric wasn't prepared for what to say, and just excitedly stated that little Theodore was looking for William, and that was why they were standing there. Since the nanny obeyed his lordship's order, she was worried that Arnold might scold the boys or something like that. William said that it seemed the Duke had officially recognized him as the first prince, and that alone was worth coming to the Duke's estate. Eric asked if the second prince's faction didn't recognize William because he was the child of a concubine. Perhaps the queen simply didn't like him, but even the boy himself didn't understand what was really going on here and who was involved. Eric wanted to figure out if William was a trustworthy person, so as not to think that his friend was a real villain. He asked him if he really wanted to become king, even if he had to fight his own brother for the throne. William stroked Theodore's head carelessly and admitted that he had absolutely no idea what might happen in the future. The boy was a descendant of the king and simply wanted to do his duty for the good of the empire, even if it meant going against his brother. It seemed that William had no family ties with his brother, and he was ready to do anything for the sake of the throne. That's why these words upset Eric, because he was sure that a family should support each other. The caring brother put baby Theo in his crib, not forgetting to put a plush toy with him. The nanny asked if the young gentleman wanted to take a nap too, but noticed that the boy was deep in thought. Standing next to the baby's crib, the young gentleman wondered what he would do if Theo were to say one day that he wanted to become a duke. If Lord Theo had really wanted this, the nanny was sure that Eric would most likely have given in to him and extended his hand. But this meant giving up all his years of effort and dedication, and for a long time Eric trained on his own to become a Grand Duke. He even fought his fears every day, went to training, and held the sword with trembling hands, afraid to even look at it. And if that had happened, Clarissa wondered if she would still have been able to support the young master. Rusty came into the children's room and brought a gift from his lordship, which surprised the heroine incredibly. Inside, like a jewel in a setting, lay a magnificent blue dress, the fabric shimmering in the candlelight like a summer sky after rain. Rusty saw the surprise flash in Clarissa's eyes, and perhaps this dress was a symbol of something much bigger that he could only guess at. Clarissa didn't understand why the Duke had given her the dress so suddenly, and Rusty